Now we see how in Japan in 1970 there was complete destruction in the city. At this time in Tokyo, many magicians fought against terrifying monsters, and as soon as their spell was ready, they began to cast it. They released their magic, which began to attack the monsters, and immediately after that there was a loud explosion. But still, as soon as the dust began to settle, they saw that the monster had survived. But the guys couldn't understand why their attack didn't even scratch the monsters. Well, as soon as they started looking closely, they saw many monsters appearing from other sides. And one of the guys began to sob and cowardly with fear because he began to understand that now they were all going to die. And at the same moment, one of the monsters began to use fire that seemed to be born from his huge paws. And those guys were already preparing for death. After all, they saw how a huge fireball began to fly towards them. But suddenly something strange happened. I didn't realize that everyone was still alive. And all because some mysterious guy appeared and was able to stop the attack of the monsters. But the guys still recognized this guy and began to rejoice that he had finally come to their aid. But then the hero turned around and began to tell the guys that they did a good job. And at that very moment, all those guys standing behind him began to sob with joy. But then the hero began to shout that they should all retreat and leave this battle to him. And just a second the guys began to obey him and run away. But there were also guys who I didn't understand. Should they really run away and leave him alone? But then another guy answered his friend that, what kind of person is he really? And the fact that he is the founder of magic, and he is the strongest mage, and the fact that he is the strongest person famous by Uchikami Atsumi. And suddenly the guy began to wipe away his tears and tell his friend that everything is right. And this is exactly the person who is standing there now. Well, our hero standing in front of the monsters was full of determination. And he knew that he could deal with these terrifying monsters. But before he had time to notice, many different monsters surrounded him, and one of them decided that he would attack first. But our hero realized that this attack was too slow, and he immediately jumped into the air, and stretching out his hand, he began to cast a spell, because of which a bright light began to glow at the tips of his fingers. Well, after a few minutes, most of the monsters were destroyed and they were lying helpless on the earth. And putting out his hand, our hero began to tell them to come over. And as soon as most of the monsters came within arm's reach of him, another spell began to be cast, and a bright light was heard that illuminated the floor of the city. One day, a bunch of monsters suddenly appeared all over the world. This event became known as the disaster, that humanity's weapons were completely useless against monsters. However, humanity opened its eyes and noticed the possibilities of magic. Only she was able to defeat the monsters. The battle between monsters and humanity lasted more than 10 years. But now we, together with our beloved viewers, will return to the present. And only one guy could save the whole world. Well, you all ask why you... Well, as soon as our hero raised his head, he saw the Demon Lord in front of him. And this is a top-ranked monster boss disaster, and enormous magical power and pressure emanated from it. And despite the fact that his entire body was cut up, suddenly our hero looked that he suddenly began to use magic at the 14th level. So he decided to use his power from the very beginning. And after a bright flash, our hero noticed that he began to use 6-element compound magic. But our hero noticed this and began to build a protective wall of stones and branches in front of him. But still it was very difficult for him to restrain such a huge force that was pressing on him from all sides. And while protecting himself with strength, the hero suddenly noticed something strange. And immediately after that there was a huge explosion, and our hero began to fall to the ground with minor injuries. Well, as soon as he flew to the ground, he managed to group and land on his feet. Well, as soon as he raised his head, he saw the Demon Lord in front of him. And he realized that he was strong, and this was the strongest monster he had fought with. But now he understood that there was no way he could lose to him, and the fact that he now has no other choice. And as soon as he concentrated, he began to release terrifying power and strength from his body. After all, my strength is determined by its level, and the number of magic circles determines this level. And the highest level that the Demon Lord could reach was 14 circles. Well, the maximum limit for our hero is 15 laps. As soon as he used the 15th level and his skill Absolute Emptiness, a bright light appeared that began to demolish everyone in its path. And after that, in the same place where the battle took place, there was simply desert left due to the excess of magical power, and the Demon Lord's crown began to evaporate into thin air. But at the same moment, our hero began to fall to the ground exhausted, but he still understood that he had defeated the boss. Thanks to this disaster, the end would finally come, but he still used up all his magic. And the fact that he will die as a great sage, this is a good way to go, and the fact that he lived a good life. And as soon as he closed his eyes, the bright light that began to appear near his body shone brighter and brighter, and suddenly his magical soul began to emerge from his chest. And as soon as the magical soul separated from the body, it began to head in an unknown direction. And after a few seconds, she was already flying to some building. And flying through the window, the soul saw a body lying in a hospital bed. And flying even closer, she merged with him. And at the same moment, the guy lying on the hospital bed began to twitch his hand. And suddenly he jumped up and began to look around. But he was surprised by the fact that he was alive, and even after he had used up all his magic. And at the same moment, as soon as he turned his head towards where the mirror was, he couldn't believe his eyes what he just saw. After all, he didn't see himself but some strange guy, and he couldn't understand who the hell he was. But at the same moment, a doctor and a nurse began to enter the room, and now they saw a frightened guy who looked at himself in the mirror and immediately began to turn towards them. And a little later, the doctor asked the guy to lie down on the hospital bed because he had to examine him. And suddenly the doctor was surprised at what he saw because he simply could not believe it. And the fact that the guy lost consciousness and was in critical condition as a result of a traffic accident, but had already fully recovered as if he had been healed by holy magic. But the guy suddenly thought about it because this is most likely because his body is indeed automatically healed by holy magic. But he would be reassured by the words that the doctor said about the traffic accident. But while the nurse was dressing him, he began to ask the doctor if his magic power had been healed, to which the doctor replied what he meant by magic power. But the guy continued to say that during the disaster he fought with monsters. But the doctor and the nurse could not understand what he was saying and whether he had really lost his mind. And the doctor suddenly began asking the guy if he could tell him his name and the current year, to which the guy replied that his name is Minato and now it must be 1970. But the doctor immediately realized that he had post-traumatic syndrome and it looked like memory damage. And the fact that his name is Minato and now it's 2023. Well, Minato just couldn't believe these words. He didn't fully understand. Is it really true? And the fact that now is 2023 and looking at the doctor and nurse, he realized that they were definitely not lying. But at the same moment, his attention was attracted by the TV that stood nearby, and the fact that it was so thin and with such a clear image. And the calendar that stood near the TV showed that it was now 2023, to press something on it. But Minato, noticing this, could not understand what kind of small device it was because he had never seen such a thing before. And the fact that he is really now in the future, and now he is definitely convinced of this. But the doctor began to raise his hand and show with his palm that the disaster he mentioned happened 50 years ago, and since then it has not been repeated. And Minato began to ask questions about monsters, to which the doctor replied that there are monsters, but there are very few of them, and now is a calm time. Well, Minato thought that if this is true, then they have finally achieved peace. And now he took a deep breath because he was so happy that the attack was finally over. But the doctor continued to say that Minato is dead, and during the great disaster 50 years ago, he sacrificed himself to save the world. So there is no way he can be that Minato guy who once fought against terrifying monsters. But Minato actually understood that at that time he really died, but now he has reincarnated into this guy. But the most important question is why this happened. And a few weeks later, in one of the residential high-rise buildings, because he entered the apartment, he began to look at everything that was in this room. Names, I realized that this is the guy's room that is his. And immediately he began to study that guy. And having found the notebook, he realized that his parents died when he was still a child. But then he was adopted by other parents. But it soon turned out that his foster parents kicked him out and sent him to boarding school. But for another minute I noticed that this guy has since been living on the inheritance of his parents. But lying on the bed, our hero still realized that magical reincarnations do not exist. This means that his reincarnation was the work of God, or is it all just an accident? But suddenly, he discovered a card in which it was written that the guy was a student at the Magic Academy, and that in his time, there was no reason for its existence, and it seemed to him that everything would be interesting. But suddenly someone started calling Minato on the phone that was near his feet in the bag. And having taken it into his hands, he could not understand what to do with this thing. And he just sat and watched the phone vibrate in his hands. But suddenly Arthur, for no apparent reason, simply threw the phone behind his back. And as soon as the phone landed on the floor and hit it, it stopped ringing. And immediately after the call, I received an SMS from Tanado-kun, and it was written there that he heard that he had already been discharged from the hospital and he could come to school. After all, he does not have enough money. And the very next day, Minato approached the main gate of the Magic Academy, and going inside the yard, he saw many children wearing school uniforms. Well, Minato had too many emotions because he understood that going to school as an adult was so stressful. Of course, I was great and all that, but as soon as he saw a guy with a magic circle and flame magic, and the fact that he was trying at all his speed to destroy some kind of dummy with his stupidity, he couldn't understand what the hell was happening with magic, and what generally happens to their magical power. And at the same moment, Minato began to look at all the students who were near him, and feeling the aura of everyone and their magical power, he suddenly became thoughtful. Holding his head in his hands, he didn't understand why this was such talking shit, and the fact that this is not true, and this cannot be, and their power is barely a tenth compared to the newcomers of his time, and can these guys even succeed as magicians? And yet Minato could not understand because he was simply intoxicated by reality, and this suggests that the magic had weakened so much. And wandering around the academy for a short time, he finally found his class 2A. And as soon as he entered the classroom, he began to look for a place where he could sit. And at the moment it was like he had a blast from the past because he was so excited and that he was wondering if he had friends here. But at the same moment, someone behind him began to walk up behind him with loud steps. And one of the three guys began to tell Minato how dare he ignore his message, even if he is just a pathetic Kusanagi. Well, as soon as he didn't have to turn his head to see who it was talking behind him, he immediately asked who he was. But that guy began to get angry, and the veins on his forehead appeared from anger. And suddenly he hit the desk with his foot across the river. Minato was sitting and screamed how dare he forget him. And coming closer and closer to Minato, that guy began to insult him, calling him an insignificant piece of garbage. Minato suddenly began to remember that he met his friend, who called him on the phone recently. And that guy, holding out his hand, began to say that he finally remembered, and he knows what it means to be a friend. But Minato immediately stood up and began to shake the guy's hand and answer the question of what it means to get along well with each other. But that guy suddenly removed his hand, and in loud words began to say no need that he wasn't talking about that. For his clothes, that guy began to say that the money had run out, and he should hurry up and give them his money, because he had a lot left as an inheritance from his parents. Well, Minato was not a fool, and realized that this guy whom he was reborn was being bullied by school bullies. But a second of silence led to the fact that that guy began to swing at our hero, shouting so that he would not be stupid. But the doors to the class opened, and the girl coming inside began to say good morning to all the other guys. This girl was also sparkling, as if she was shining in her new uniform and excellent hairstyle. And at that very second, the guy who wanted to hit our hero began to blush at the sight of that girl. And there is no need to say that they will definitely talk later. And as soon as they walked away and began to leave the classroom, Minato realized that they were complete fools. The lesson began, and the teacher began to say that today's lesson topic is a great disaster. And the final tribulation is known as the Great Tribulation. Monsters began to appear all over the world and humanity fell into despair. But the discoverer of magic, the great sage Minato, thought differently, and the fact that he did not give up and defeated all the monsters himself. And finally, he faced the boss of the disaster, the Demon Lord, whom he crushed and sacrificed his own life. From then on, the disaster never returned, and the teacher immediately asked the students a question, who is, and with checks. Minato and Jennifer began to raise her hand, and the teacher, seeing this, began to tell her that she could answer the question. And she began to say that the only survivor of the first disaster, and the first Moss, and also the reason why the Komi Academy of Magic was built. And he was a world hero and the idol of every magician. And the teacher replied that everything was correct. He was the only survivor of the first disaster, and also the first person to use magic, and the Academy of Magic was created to produce many magicians like him, and with Minato's checks, he is the greatest mark in the history of mankind, everyone's next test. But Minato, who was sitting at his desk, couldn't understand that if only it weren't necessary anymore. And he couldn't hear it because all of this embarrassed him so much. After all, he did not at all expect that he would be tortured like that and that he should not have come to school. Well, everything is as the doctor said, peace has finally reigned on Earth. And because of this, the magic became weak. After all, no one fought against strong opponents to become stronger. And now, Minato was very calm, and he had never felt like this before. But as soon as the bell rang, the teacher, leaving the class, began to tell the students that that was all for today, and they could go, and tomorrow there would be an assessment of their magical power. But suddenly that guy came up to our hero again and started saying, no need that he heard that tomorrow there will be an assessment of magical power, and it will be fun to see how shitty his magic is. But Minato still didn't understand why this guy is so stupid, and when will he shut up, and now there's no point in lingering here. And as soon as he got up and began to leave, the guy said to Minato in the back that his parents also did not have magical powers, and it was true that he was an orphan from childhood. And immediately after these words, he began to laugh very loudly. But then Minato turned around and told him what a dumbass he was. That guy very angry, and he started shouting that he would now bring him down from heaven to earth. And immediately he began to call upon a magic circle from which a huge flame appeared that scattered all the chairs and tables around the class. Well, the students who were watching this started screaming for him to calm down because he was really going to use magic in the class. Well, that guy didn't want to listen to anyone and continued to accumulate power. And at that very second he still used his magic, and huge fire magic began to fly towards our hero, who stood in the same place and did not even think of evading. Well, that girl who saved that guy from a fight the first time ran again and screamed for Minato to be careful. But Minato simply didn't care. He looked at that huge ball and stood rooted to the spot. And at the same moment, there was a huge explosion and the entire school class began to be on fire. But the girl immediately started screaming that he couldn't use magic because of a petty quarrel, and someone may suffer because of their squabbles. Well, the attacking guy started shouting that it was not his fault but that guy Minato, and he was the first to run into him. But all the guys looked at the dust that rose in the classroom, and as soon as it began to settle, the silhouette of a man was visible in the distance. But still, Minato stood there without a scratch on him. The guys who looked at him couldn't believe their eyes. After all, they thought that he had simply come to an end. But Minato, scratching his head, told the attacker that he had hit him. Well, those guys couldn't believe that he wasn't hurt after receiving his direct attack at point-blank range. But Minato began to think that he did not need to actively use magic, and that he could easily protect himself from first-level magic with a simple magical barrier. And what he endured only because he was just a child. But looking at that guy, Minato decided that he urgently needs to be punished. And as soon as those guys looked at the terrifying expression on our hero's face, a frost crept through their skin. And getting seriously angry, our hero began to release enormous energy from his body. And a bright light appeared in the classroom, from which the children began to squint. And I don't understand what's happening, and they couldn't move. And the fact that they did not understand at all what kind of magic this was and what was going on here. But Minato, in all seriousness, began to approach those guys who raised their tails at him. But as he came closer to that guy with red hair, Minato realized that he had already begun to cower from fear. And raising his hand, our hero already wanted to finish him off on the spot and teach him a good lesson. And at that moment, he almost shit his pants because there was no way out to escape. But it all ended when the teacher came into the class and started asking what the noise was here, and who used magic in the classroom, and he is waiting for an explanation. But Minato exhaled deeply and began to speak to the teacher, that nothing was happening in the classroom, and maybe someone was using magic outside. But the teacher replied that there were no magic club classes in the yard, but Minato still continued to say that it was possible that some student used magic at his own discretion. After all, the teacher knows that wizards love to use their magic. But the teacher asked about the smoke that was in the class, and Minato once again answered that it came from outside. And yet the teacher understood that since Kusagami said so, it means it's true. And after this conversation, The teacher began to tell the whole class that he was going to find the culprit. They should return to their places. But Minato waved his hand and thought that he had caused a lot of inconvenience, and he would probably need to create false evidence to close this case. Well, the students were in complete shock at what they had just glimpsed. Well, while all the students were confused, the guy with red hair was both annoyed and excited by what he had just seen. But Minato continued to think that even if they were just students, their level of magic was still too low, and would they be able to defeat the monster at all? Even if the disaster was over, there were still monsters around, and that he should go and see what is happening there. And as soon as night fell, our hero set out on a journey to a city that was destroyed, and moving in the air in magic circles, he quickly wanted to get closer to the target and reconnoiter the situation, and landed on one of the buildings and looked out over the city. He realized that the city of Shibuya had changed a lot, and Minato decided that he had no need to stay here for long. He needed to continue on his way, and I continued my movement. He understood that he did not feel any monsters in the area, and everything was in Ukraine. But it seems that the police took all the people out of here. But a little time later, I still felt the aura of monsters in the distance, as well as the aura of one person, and he decided to speed up before something terrible happened. But at this time, the terrifying monster had already pressed the frightened girl against the wall, who began to tell him not to come near. But the monster simply didn't care and began to growl loudly and show his sharp teeth. But at that very second, some mysterious guy appeared in front of the girl. But the monster was not frightened, and he continued to fly straight at them with the goal of destroying them. And as soon as he approached the hero at arm's length, he immediately began to act. And a moment later, the fight was over, and the monster lay immobilized on the ground. And as soon as Minato turned around and looked at the girl, he saw that she was very frightened and that he arrived on time. After all, if he had been late by even a few minutes, she would have come to an end. But suddenly Minato noticed that the sign of the magic police was hanging on her chest, and turning around, he finally told her to be careful next time. But all the girl could say was thank you to the guy who saved her, and saw that he did not linger, and immediately summoned his magic circle and ran away. But she wondered who this guy was, and it looked like he was an outstanding magician. And now, when she thinks about it, it seems to her that he didn't even cast any spells. But Minato, moving in the air, thought that it was good that he hid his face, and since he had just reincarnated, he didn't want to stand out. But to think that she could have been killed by a monster of such a low level, and that the level of the magic police had also dropped significantly, and apparently people at this time are not able to defeat the monster. And not only students, but also the police, and the fact that the mages have weakened is a fact. And after thinking for a short time, Minato still smiled. After all, he began to understand that it seems that even in this era, they need his strength. And in any case, he should destroy all the monsters in the area. And the next day, a man standing near some machine began to say that today they would not measure their magical power. And they must make sure that they have received both the amount and the attribute. And this is the most important indicator for those who hope to become a professional magician. But Minato didn't understand. Couldn't he measure his strength without this thing? And the fact that even teachers do not know such basic things and magical perception is the basis of magic. But suddenly, his classmate approached Minato and began asking him if he could have a few words. And as soon as they stepped aside, the other guys noticed that Maria and Minato were talking to each other, and they didn't even know about Maria. But then Maria began to tell Minato that this was their first conversation, and that she was the second daughter of the noble magical family of Medzuha. But Minato was a little lost because she was talking about some noble family of magicians. But Maria realized that he did not know what she was talking about, and began to tell that they were one of the main 4 noble houses of the leading magicians. And Minato realized that in his time there was nothing like this, and that he had never even heard of the Medzuha family. But after looking closely at her, our hero understood that her level of magical power is rather low and very weak for a girl coming from a family of outstanding magicians. But Maria couldn't understand what was wrong with this guy, because she so generously started a conversation with him, and he should be grateful. A red-haired guy watched all this and looked closely at Minato, and he began to get angry because how dare he talk to Maria. But Minato began to ask Maria why he cares about the magical nobility. But Maria realized that this guy, the more he talks, the more he infuriates her. But Maria still decided to calm down and take a deep breath, and the fact that she is a noble woman and should remember her dignity. But Minato did not understand what was wrong with this girl. But she was also worried about the fact that when Tadano hit him with magic yesterday, he remained unharmed, and there must be some reason for this. But as soon as Maria started talking about yesterday, the man standing behind her began to say that the remaining guys should be assessed. And Minato immediately moved from his place, saying that it was time to measure his magical power. But Maria already wanted to look at his strength and stop living in guesses because of what happened yesterday. But the first one still approached Tadano and began to extend his hand. And as soon as he touched the magic stone, it began to glow. And the magic stone showed that his magic power was 1,000 points, and the fact that it belongs to the attribute of fire. And at the same moment, Tadano saw it was incredibly happy, because it was better than he could have imagined. But Minato, who was watching him, realized that if it was 1,000, then the standard of measurement had not changed in the last 50 years. And the next one who had to test her magic was Maria. And as soon as I touched it, a blue color appeared, and the magic crystal immediately began to show that her magic power was 2,000 points, and her attribute was water. Tadano, in which I watched her, realized that the two of them had the highest performance this year, and they have every chance of becoming excellent magicians. And the rest of the students standing nearby began to rejoice. After all, they expected fire magic from these prodigies, and the fact that Maria was so amazing. Our hero was in complete shock because he began to think that this was probably a joke and that she was only 2,000 and a little better than a beginner. Maria turned around and thought that she had surpassed Tadano, and that was the true power of the Medzuha house. But as soon as she looked at Minato, he immediately began to turn his head, because he didn't understand why she had such a smug look, and she shouldn't look at him with that expression, because it's unbearable. But the man immediately began to say that the next one who will measure his magical power will be Minato. But as soon as he began to approach the magic crystal, other guys began to whisper behind his back that they didn't fully know who he was and whether he was the one who had the worst results. Her grades in school are impressive, but his talent for magic is disgusting. But Tadano, who watched this, thought that Minato was simply a moron. He had no talents, and now he would simply disgrace himself in front of Maria. But the girl Maria was finally waiting for him to show them how much magical power he has. But he definitely won't surpass her. And as soon as everything was ready, Minato began to stretch out his hand to the magic crystal. But still Minato didn't understand what to do. After all, at one time he stood out too much, and it was very stressful to attract a lot of attention to himself. And maybe he can restrain himself a little now, but although it doesn't matter anymore. And as soon as he touched the magic stone, everyone standing behind him held their breath. And at the same moment, the magic stone began to glow with rainbow colors. Every second, the magical stone glowed brighter and brighter. But Minato decided that he would give it his all and let everyone see what he was capable of, and that if it can change his power as a great sage, then he will start. But immediately after that, the entire magical school began to glow with a bright light. And all the students who were sitting at their study desks began to notice something. And those students, even who were lying on a bench on the street, began to explode from their seats. Maria, who was watching our hero, could not understand what was happening, and the magic counter that was installed on the stone began to spin like crazy. Due to the enormous power that Minato poured into the stone, it began to crack, and all this magical power began to be released and fly into the sky, covering the entire magical school. And eventually the magic stone exploded and began to fly into different pieces. And the guys standing behind began to cover their faces with their hands, because a huge magical force began to press on them. But after this, huge pieces of magic stone flew straight towards the other students. But suddenly, a barrier appeared in front of their face that held back the fragments of the magic stone. Well, Minato couldn't understand that the magic stone broke after he became a little more serious, and the fact that no one here could feel his magical power. And are these guys really capable of becoming magicians? He wondered. But the teacher began to approach the children and ask if anyone was hurt, but they answered that everything was fine, and went up to the cops. He asked if everything was okay, but the same one answered that he was lucky, even though he ended up in the very epicenter, so everything was fine. But for the first time, The teacher saw the measuring device break down, and perhaps there was some kind of defect in it. And for him it was not good, because now they will not be able to find out the current magical power of the Minato and its attribute. Well, our hero didn't understand. Is this really a problem? But the teacher began to explain that they planned to divide the students into groups for practical classes, and they wanted to decide on the groups after they saw the results, and the teacher immediately began asking Tadano that Kusanagi if they would accept him into their team, to which he began to look at his friends and smile strangely, and he immediately answered the sensei that they would of course accept him into their team, to which the teacher thanked him. But Tadano approached Minato and began to tell him that he was looking forward to this moment. The next day in the destroyed Shibuya Old Town, monsters still inhabited places that had been badly damaged during the Great Disaster. Shibuya is currently abandoned by magicians, and the police regularly exterminate the monsters living here. And also the students of the academy should help them in this. And since more than half of the monsters have already been destroyed by professional magicians, they should not worry too much. But Minato, standing next to the teacher, suddenly thought that it was a practical lesson and it was unexpected. But even students should be able to destroy a couple of monsters. In the end, they will work in groups. And turning around, Minato realized that he was here last night, but it was somehow strange. After all, he was sure that he had destroyed all the monsters, but he still feels some. And the fact that there are no signs of disaster here, but he didn't understand why monsters appear here. But the girls who stood behind him began to say that they would compete, and today they would definitely not lose. But I didn't understand why they were so careless, even though they were in real danger. But Maria, who was standing nearby, suddenly began to look at our hero, who sighed from the fact that he realized that his odnoklasniki were ordinary dumbasses. But the teacher began to call all the students and say that classes were almost starting and they must definitely work as a group. And as soon as the teacher walked away, he started calling Minato. And after a moment he pressed him against the wall and began to show off in front of his friends and tell our hero that now no one will bother them. But Minato realized that it seemed he was too kind, and this time he would not be so gentle, and began to tell that guy Tadano that if he didn't like him, then he could simply ignore him. But Tadano suddenly screamed that words weren't allowed to be trash, and the fact that he forgot who is trash here, and why Maria was so interested in him. But Minato couldn't understand what he was saying. Did he just move his head? Dawned on him, and he realized that it was all because he liked Maria, and Tadano, after hearing what he heard, began to get angry to such an extent that he could hardly restrain his emotions. But suddenly Minato noticed something strange, as if someone was approaching them. And at that same second, Tadano began to cast a spell and prepare a magic circle to attack Minato with fire. But Minato began to tell him not to do this, to which the classmate replied that now it was too late to apologize. And our hero told him to turn around, but Tadano said that he couldn't be fooled by such childish tricks. But he felt something strange and still turned his head. And suddenly, they saw a terrible monster standing behind them. But the guys had already begun to cower from fear because they didn't understand where it came from. And in general, this is impossible, and why he ended up in this particular place. And she also looks like he was very strong, and the fact that this monster was also a demonic soldier. The frightened guys began to ask Tadano if he could defeat him, but he replied that of course he could, because for him it was bullshit. And summoning his fire magic circle again, he began to cast a spell, and as soon as his magic circle gained enough magical power, he began to attack the monster with fire magic. And considering that the work was finally finished, the guys were pleased that they had defeated the enemy. But still they rejoiced early because the monster remained alive. And when the guys saw this, they realized that they couldn't even scratch him. But Minato understood that the demonic soldier could not be destroyed by his low-level magic. And as soon as the monster took a few steps, the guys were horrified. After all, they had never seen such a terrifying monster in front of them. And now they were simply cowards like small puppies. And having fallen to earth, they could no longer escape anywhere and watched as the monster gradually approached them. But the guys started crying very loudly because they didn't understand that they would die here. Because of fear, they even wet their pants. But as soon as the monster swung and was ready to finish off those guys, he felt something, some unknown force standing near him. and raising his eyes he saw a guy standing nearby. Well, Minato was so calm that the monster, who looked into his eyes, suddenly saw a future in which this guy would simply destroy him, and at that very moment he jumped back, because he realized that now he himself, the terrifying demon soldier, could die. And passing by the cowardly classmates lying on the ground, Minato said that apparently even a demonic soldier is capable of speaking. Who is the strongest of all those here? The monster continued to be wary of our hero and stood nearby without moving. But as soon as Minato began to radiate his enormous power, the hand of the huge monster suddenly moved. And at that very moment, the monster seemed to go crazy and began to growl at the entire area, also emitting enormous strength and power and calling on his magic circles. But Minato at the same moment wanted to check who was stronger than that monster with his 2 magic circles, or he with his 1. But the cowardly classmates lying behind Minato began to tell him that he would not be able to defeat this creature of first-level magic, and they would all die. But the monster began to release a second-level crushing stone that flew straight towards Minato, but our hero simply blocked his attack with his barrier. But immediately after this, the monster began to use the first level of fire arrow. A bright explosion covered the entire area, and what happened in the end was that the monster saw that his attack was simply pointless. But Minato stood in the same place and didn't move a centimeter, even though the guys sitting behind him couldn't look at this huge explosion normally. But as soon as the explosion ended, with a little fear on their faces, the guys still began to see something ahead of them. And all that was left of that monster, and the wet date, was that he melted into pieces. And the guys couldn't believe what just happened, and the fact that Minato killed that demonic soldier, and the fact that this is simply impossible because someone like Minato can do this. But our hero, leaving, answered those guys that, unlike him, his first-level magic was capable of killing a demonic soldier. But still, Minato thought that everything was somehow strange, that the demonic soldier ended up in Shibuya. After all, yesterday he killed all the monsters, but they appeared again, and this is very strange. And the fact that this is an omen of disaster, and the situation is more serious than he expected. And what he had already seen before, how terrifying monsters killed all people indiscriminately, and without any regret when little girls or boys watched some things they killed. And how the greatest mages lost their friends, comrades, and relatives. And thinking about all this, Minato suddenly became sad, and clenching his fist he decided that even if disaster happens again, he will save everyone. Well, the guys who were behind our hero couldn't believe that he defeated the soldier, and was it really Minato? And getting very angry, Tadano hit the wall with all his strength with his fist. After all, he couldn't believe that a guy like Minato could wield such terrifying power. But they could not even guess that Maria was watching this whole battle, hiding around the corner. But a little earlier, Maria killed the monster with the help of her water discs, which simply cut it into pieces. And her team watching her looked in surprise at what was happening because they did not expect anything else from their partner. But Maria couldn't understand how anyone could be surprised at such a level, and she was worried that they were such ordinary people. But now there's nothing to be done. She has such talent. But suddenly, Maria saw her classmates who were taking Minato aside, and something was explained to him in the distance in a rude tone. But at the same moment, Maria told her comrades that she would go away for a minute. And as soon as they turned the corner, she saw that those guys were mocking Minato. And if that was the case, then she couldn't let them get away with it. But as soon as she ran to the corner of the building and looked behind it, she saw something that she did not expect to see in this same place, how the monster stood next to the guys. But she began to remember that she had already seen this monster somewhere, and suddenly she remembered the books that the teacher gave her, and the fact that it was the Devil's Guardian. This is not the monster that they can defeat, and Maria still decided, clenching her fist, that they need help, and that she is a person from the Mizuha clan and cannot leave everything just like that. And as soon as she ran around the corner and started moving towards that monster, screaming for them to run away, she saw a bright light, after which an explosion appeared. And covering her face, she could not understand what happened and who was able to attack so strongly. But as soon as the fire wave passed, she saw that in the place where the monster stood, everything was burning with a red flame, and the monster disappeared. And the one who destroyed him was Minato, who stood with his outstretched hand. And Maria couldn't understand what it was, and could it really be Minato's magic? And as far as she remembers, He was timid and had no inclinations for magic. But now he is completely like a different person. And she didn't hear him reciting spells, and really he simply didn't read them and was able to use magic. And in general, she couldn't believe that he defeated the guard of the first rank, and the level of power of the monster is determined by the number of crystals it has, and its place in the hierarchy is already established based on it. And in 6th place are magical beasts with 1 stone, and in 5th place were the magical guards with 2 stones, and in 4th place are demons with 3 magic crystals. In 3rd place are the supreme demons with 4 stones. In 2nd place are demons with 5 stones, and in 1st place is the devil or Satan. Each creature has a fixed number of active ranks, and this is something that all modern magicians should know. In order to defeat a guard, you must have at least the 3rd rank, and with the 1st, it should be impossible. And while thinking, Maria noticed that Minato began to move towards her. But Maria suddenly wondered why she was hiding at all, and as soon as Minato passed by her, she suddenly decided to hide even deeper. But our hero was very attentive, and when leaving, she began to say that it was a good hobby for her to peep. And I start to come out from around the corner, Maria suddenly asked our hero how he knew that she was here. But Minato replied that it would be strange if the magician did not notice this. And as soon as he looked at her, he soon realized that after all he was right, the fact that she really cannot sense magical power. And immediately our hero turned around and began to walk away in a different direction. But then Maria started shouting at his back to tell him to wait. After all, she wanted to know what his words meant and he should explain to her. But as soon as she ran around the corner behind Minato, she couldn't understand where he had disappeared because literally a few seconds had passed. And our hero was right above her, standing on the building and watching Maria search for him, but thinking about whether he should check the area for monsters. And as soon as he concentrated, he realized that there were no more guards nearby, but there were a decent number of magical beasts, and the fact that he doubts that the other students will cope with them if Tadano's level is considered excellent. Then their number will be reduced at least a little, and this area around the Shibuya station. But still, he made his decision, and stretching out his 2 hands in different directions, he began to call upon magic circles. And as soon as the spell was ready, Minato was ready. Apply the 2nd rank of magic projectiles that began to fly out of the magic circles on his hand. And at the same moment, magical projectiles began to fly straight over the entire city. And our hero's classmates noticed this. But some were dull and thought that these were meteorites. But other students who were a little smarter said that it was. And Maria, who was below and was looking for Minato, also noticed that it was the magic that flew over her that she was struck by such an amount. But at this time, many demonic beasts surrounded the school children, and they realized that they could no longer cope. And as soon as one of the demonic beasts attacked the girl standing in front of him, and she had already said goodbye to her life, because she saw how huge and sharp teeth were right next to her head. But the magic projectile that appeared near her destroyed the monster. And when she came to her senses, the girl could not understand what had happened, because she saw only a bright light in front of her eyes. But at this time, Minato continued to stand on the tallest building in the city and watch as his shells flew straight to the target, and according to his feelings, everything was moving as it should. And I watched as his shells simply killed all the monsters to smithereens. He suddenly began to feel nervous because of what he suddenly realized, that after all, maybe he overdid it because he killed all the monsters that were in the nearest areas. And as soon as the last monster died from his projectile, he grabbed his head and realized for sure that he had finished off almost all the monsters at once. And the fact that this was already implied as a lesson, and he still should have reduced his strength. And looking around, Minato realized that he could finally get down from this building. After all, there was no one nearby for anyone to see him. And with the help of his magic circles, which he placed at his feet, he was able to be on Earth literally in 1 second. And he realized that there is no need to hide his strength to the extreme. But if it attracts attention, it will cause some inconvenience. And after wandering around the alleys a little, he still found a group of classmates and a teacher who was standing near the deceased demonic beast. And the teacher began to say that he did not know that there were so many magical animals left here, and the herd had to be broken before the students arrived. And the fact that he noticed something strange was that the demonic beast died from 1 blow, and this work was clearly a person of proper skill. And the fact that this is magic without the use of elements, magic without elements, and such an innumerable number of projectiles. And he had never had to deal with this, and the fact that without this magic, they would still be in serious danger, and the fact that there are two creatures is not a problem. But to resist 6, he is afraid that the students would not be able to cope with them. But the students were confused about why there were so many magical beasts here, and the fact that they almost died. And the teacher turned around and began to ask for forgiveness from the students, and explained to them that they heard that the killing of the herd should have been dealt with by the academy police. It would be worth making sure of this. And he is really very sorry that he put the students in danger. But one of the students began to ask the teacher who saved them. Well, the teacher replied that he didn't know, but the student simply wanted to thank him. But the teacher immediately thought that it was unlikely that it was someone from the police or official magicians, and it was possible that it was an outlaw magician. But the fact remains that he saved them, and the unknown magician can only be thanked. But that unknown magician was Minato standing next to the teacher, and a little later, when everyone had calmed down, the girls began to whisper whether the others had seen the Tamaja and what it was all about. But Minato continued to think that it seemed like no one was hurt, and even those stupid people who stood behind him and looked at him angrily. But the only one who guessed was Maria, that Minato killed the guard of the first rank, and in addition, a huge amount of magic. The fact that it is his doing the magic of the fire element, as well as magic without their use. And now there are no students possessing 2 elements, and not even this person. But still, she changed her mind and decided that these were just guesses. After all, he could not possibly possess 2 elements, and someone else used magic without elements. But the fact that he defeated the guard is a fact, and she still wondered who this Minato was. But the other guys started discussing that those things looked like lasers, and Minato must have done it. But the other guy said that this couldn't be, to which he was told that he had killed the guard. But Tadano, suddenly with an angry face, began to tell the guys to shut up, or else he would finish him off. And those guys started looking at him with stupid looks. After all, it can't be that the worthless sociopath Minato is strong, and in any case there's something wrong here. And those guys, out of fear, immediately began to agree with the words, Tadano, is that this is really strange, not that he is doing something wrong. And the fact that Minato is playing a dishonest game, and the fact that he turned his nose up and he will rip off his mask. And after classes, Minato began to leave the Magic Academy. But suddenly, he stopped and saw that many guys were approaching him and asking whether he was really waiting for them. And at the head of those guys was Tadano, who with a stupid expression on his face began to approach our hero. And he, in turn, began to say that again they were an annoying group, and didn't they think that it would be better for them to practice magic? But Tadano, in response, began to shout to our hero that he was talking too much for a scoundrel. But no, I couldn't understand what this madman meant. And Tadano continued to tell him not to pretend, because he wouldn't believe that he could use one of mine, and he must admit what kind of trick he used there. But after exhaling deeply, Minato still realized that there was no point in trying to talk to them. Tadano immediately began to turn around and walk towards his comrades. After all, he thought that he could defeat our hero with numbers. But Minato was not the type to be cowardly, and began to tell the guys that there was no need for disaster. But these words struck a chord with Tadano, and he began to shout towards our hero so that he would not pretend that he could do whatever he wanted. And running up to the Minato, he was ready to strike him with his fist, shouting that magic was useless in a fight. And as soon as he ran up, he hit Minato straight in the face. And immediately after that, other guys joined in and began waving their fists and legs and beating Minato. And while they were beating him, Tadano began to say that without magic, he could not do anything. And he may not even try to apologize because he will finish him off anyway. And Minato stood in the same place and realized that everything was like a wall, and the fact that his magic is activated automatically. So even though they wave their fists all night, they still won't be able to inflict a single wound. And the fact that there are so many problems with them, and our hero thought, maybe he can pretend that they hit him at least once, because he was so bored that he decided that he would sit down while those fools waved their fists. But at the same moment, Maria's voice was heard, who began to ask what they were doing here. But those guys did not expect that she would appear here, and turning around and not with a strange expression on their faces, began to look at her. Tadano immediately began to say that there was nothing like that, they were just having fun. But Maria knew that they were mocking Minato. And speaking of the fact that somewhere You hear that students of the Academy of Magic are doing this, and aren't they ashamed? But that guy was very ashamed after Maria's words. And they began to think that all this was because of that Minato. And who would say that it was not his fault Maria was outraged by him? And as soon as she approached the cops and took his hand, she began to say that they were leaving now. But as soon as Tadano saw that they held hands, began to get angry. So he had never been so angry in his life. And all he muttered under his breath was that it was all because of Minato. And at the same moment, he stood up and began shouting that it was all because of Minato and reciting a spell. Well, when our hero left, he realized what had begun. And those guys definitely won't calm down. And the enraged Tadano began shouting to his friends to destroy him. But Maria, as soon as she heard their words, turned around and began asking what he was going to do. But those guys could not be stopped, and together they began to use their magic circles and summon fireballs. But Maria, no matter how hard she tried, wanted to protect them both and began to use her magic, but it was too late. After all, their attack had almost reached the target, and Maria and Minato, standing still, saw how a huge fire was flying at them. Covering her face, Maria wanted to somehow avoid such an attack. And as soon as it was over, Tanado began to say that after this, it would be impossible to cheat. But the guys who stood behind him began to think that, seriously, was it a good idea? Because he really was dead. But Tanado told them that they were simply idiots and had nothing to fear. I can't say that they just accidentally used magic outside of school, and it got out of control and Minato just fell into the hands. But suddenly those guys heard Minato's voice, and he said that their foolishness had gone beyond all limits. And before he did not attach any importance to this, because he regarded it as childish behavior. But apparently now the stubborn ones will be corrected by a club, said our hero. After all, the time has come to raise stupid children. But the guys, in turn, could not believe their eyes that he survived, and after such a volume of magic. Well, Minato didn't want to listen to them, and began to raise his hand to attack them back. But in the end, he decided to tell the fools that they had endangered not only him, but also Maria, and how blind he was with his thirst for revenge. Tanado suddenly began to tell our hero that it was all his fault, and there was no point in looking down on him, and he will extinguish it as long as it takes to destroy it. And Minato, without further ado, began to raise his hand and point his index finger to the sky, and a small magic circle appeared on the tip of his finger. But the guys, as soon as they saw this, began to laugh loudly and ask him what kind of magic circle this was, and the fact that this time he would definitely die, and they began to use their magic again and attack Minato along with Maria. And before they had time to finish attacking, our hero activated his magic with 2 words, magical source, and huge vines began to appear from his magic circle, who rushed straight at those guys. And as soon as the vines tied them up, they could not understand what was happening and why they could not move. It didn't work out, so the magical vines simply sucked the life force out of them, and those guys began to fall asleep. And all this magical power simply returned back to the magic circle. And as soon as Minato finished, those guys lay exhausted on the earth. But our hero approached them and looked at them. He couldn't understand. He only sucked out a little magic, and it had already dried up. But now he hopes that they will think a little. But Maria didn't understand what kind of magic this was and what happened, and why those guys fainted. And at the same moment, Minato was about to leave as soon as he realized that he had finished everything. But Maria began to say that he shouldn't wait at least a minute, and she began to ask Minato what kind of magic it was and what it did. And he almost didn't own mine, did he? And who he is anyway, because now she doesn't recognize the old man. But with a heavy sigh, Minato realized that it would be very troublesome, and leaving our hero, asked her that she shouldn't have said something different. But with all the embarrassment, she still thanked him for saving her. And as soon as she raised her head and was ready to hear answers to the questions, she suddenly saw that Minato was missing, and with anger and embarrassment on her face, she could not understand where he had gone all this time. Well, as soon as night fell, Minato, having changed clothes and hiding his face, continued to explore the city, and landing on one of the houses, he began to look at the surrounding areas. And as soon as he began to concentrate, he realized that he had a bad feeling, so he came to find out. But apparently the monsters that were supposed to be exterminated during the day were resurrected again, but he did not understand why this was happening. If this is the case only with Shibuya, he alone will be enough. only now he senses my monsters existing in other places. And it's possible that the police simply can't keep up, and the level of magicians doesn't seem to be high. And be that as it may, it would be impossible for him to remove demons in all of Japan alone. But still, he did not understand what to do. He needs to take some measures, but for now he will focus on clearing the area in the area. He needs to act carefully without attracting attention, and continuing to destroy monsters. He moved in the air very carefully and unnoticed. But at that time, not far from our hero, a man was walking late at night from a party and he got completely drunk. But he could not even imagine that a monster was now quietly creeping up behind him. Only that huge monster opened its big mouth, and with its sharp teeth they already want to finish off that drunken man. Minato appeared, and with the help of his magical power, threw the monsters aside. And the man, noticing something strange behind him, began to slowly turn his head. But still he didn't see anything, and thought that he was just imagining things. But in fact, the monster and our hero were around the corner, and he simply began to continue walking home. Names? I couldn't even guess that the ordinary guy was filming him on his phone at the same time, and immediately posted a video about a magician in a black suit who saved a man on the internet. The next day, the guys gathered in the director's office, who was sitting at his desk, and their teacher was standing next to him. And the teacher began to say that the students of their school used magic outside the school, and they received such a message yesterday. And if this is true, then they cannot leave this issue unattended, and they must now explain the situation, whatever it may be. But Tanado immediately started screaming and pointing with his index finger at Minato that they did not use magic, and that it was Minato who started the fight. Well, our hero couldn't understand how this dumbass could lie so easily, and he even admired it. And the fact that it's not possible to remain silent here and there's still a lesson, but there's nothing left to do except explain to the teacher everything as it is. And just for a second, Minato said that all the words that guy said were lies, and Mary, standing next to them, gathered her thoughts and determination, and began to say that Tadano and his friends mocked Minato, and they were the ones who started using magic. But the teacher did not fully understand her words, and asked again about what they had started, and that is, Minato also used magic. And Maria immediately began to answer the teacher that it was self-defense and he didn't do anything wrong. But Minato was surprised by Maria's words, and as soon as Tanado began to interrupt Maria, she immediately told him to shut his mouth. And the fact that this is unthinkable, and not only was he mocking, he also dares to shift responsibility to another, and he is not the least bit ashamed as an academy student. Tanado immediately began to answer Maria that no one at all suits Minato for this academy, and therefore he proposes his exclusion. Maria, hearing these words, said that the one who does not correspond to the academy is him. But that guy still stood his ground and said that he seemed to have the best results in the entire course. And he is the only one who can stand on a par with Maria, but not Minato. And what is this conversation about? And Maria should think soberly, a guy like him won't save her, and she should look at him and become his girlfriend. But such words were so stupid that Maria simply replied to let him dream further. Tanado did not expect such an answer and was simply plunged into shock. Maria continued to say that she would never become the girlfriend of a man who enjoys bullying, a person who is prone to cruelty, and even more so, a person who chooses a completely inappropriate moment for confession. And Minato, who was watching this stupid situation, realized that what comes around is what you get. But this situation definitely evokes pity. And at the same moment, the director told the teacher that it seemed that the fault lay with Tanado and his friends. But Minato used magic for self-defense, and they don't need people who use magic for selfish reasons, so he excludes them. But then the Tanado's friends began to tell the teacher and director that they were simply obeying his instructions. Teach immediately began to tell Minato and Maria that they could already go, and as soon as they left the office, Maria was furious and began to say that it was really low and that she had not experienced such indignation for a long time. But Minato became interested in what would happen to them when they were expelled, and Maria replied that they would no longer become magicians, and for guys like them this is natural. Immediately, Maria began to ask Minato how it was possible to remain silent after everything that was said to her. But Minato answered her that he was going to speak. But then she spoke, and suddenly Minato thought about something important. And Maria noticed this and began to ask what was the matter. What she wanted was that the idea suddenly came to Minato. But this was not the first time she tried to help him out. And then in class and during classes on a real battle and she is so amazingly good. But as soon as Maria heard these words, she immediately began to feel embarrassed and her face began to turn red. Well, turning around, she began to tell Minato not to say such things, and she would go forward. But Minato, who stood and watched her, began to understand. The fact that Kusanagi Minato died and he was reborn, and did that last guy decide to die because of bullying? Or it really was an ordinary car accident, and he won't know for sure. But now they have suffered their punishment, and has at least some kind of retribution been accomplished. But at the same time, two guys stood near the director of the Magic Academy and began to say, "What does it mean that there are students who used magic outside the academy, as well as students who were involved?" And the director replied that everything was correct. And fortunately, no civilians were hurt, but the guys didn't understand why they were called. And the director responded that one of the students involved was Mizucha Maria, and immediately the girl turned around and said that she understood the state of affairs, and she thanks the director for the report. But the director finally asked the girl to say hello to their father. But she replied that the director should be calm because her father is interested in investing for the academy. And the guy standing next to the girl began to tell her that if now they found out the truth, and this Minato has quite a lot of strength, then fighting with some magicians is an extremely thankless task. If you don't have much impressive strength, then you won't win. But the guy still couldn't understand if she really wanted to say that he was stronger in comparison with them. But the girl replied that this was not so. But she was interested in him. And the fact that they will now do this will confirm this. The power level of that student Kusanagi Minato, and she also wants to resolve the issue with her sister, whether she will leave the educational institution or not. And for the guy Katsuragi Ryuji, it sounded interesting. But a little later, Minato was lying on his desk in his class and thinking about how the constancy of peace in the whole world is so unstable. Behind him, the guys began to discuss a video they had recently watched about how this magician in black is very cool. But Minato, hearing these words about the magician in black, began to wonder if this was someone from the magical aristocracy. But now he doesn't care anymore because he doesn't even want to delve into it. Friend teacher walked up to the entrance to the classroom and began waving his hand at Minato so that he would pay attention to him. And as soon as he gathered the students, he began to say that the students who could not pass the assessment of magical power would now be reassessed. And Minato realized that they had finally fixed what was standing behind Maria. Realized that she would finally find out how his real strength was Minato. But as soon as they entered the room, Maria suddenly saw her sister, who stood with a guy near a magic crystal, and she began to ask why she came to such a place. And why did she even come to such a place? And does she really need to observe the re-evaluation? And the fact that my sister really came to look at Minato, and really she also considers his strength suspicious. And as soon as the next turn was Minato, he approached the magic stone, and the assessment of magical power immediately began. But he understood that last time he broke everything, so now he needs to watch his strength. And touching the magic stone, his hand began to emit magical power that the stone absorbed. And concentrating completely, he began to concentrate his strength as much as possible. But the counter began to strangely show homological strength. And after that, he exhaled with difficulty that he had finally been able to learn and began to ask if he was okay. And the fact that finally this time, the assessment was a success. But there was still something incomprehensible. And the fact that Minato's elements are that he simply doesn't have them, and they are missing. The other guys started looking at the amount of his magic, and the counter showed 100. But the guys who saw it started talking about it, that this is the worst indicator on the course, and it is very rare that there are no elements at all. But judging by the rumors, in principle, he does not just come to her. And the guy who came with Maria's sister began to say that it was really he who defeated the gang, and apparently there was some kind of misunderstanding. But Ruka first tell her comrade that they are leaving because the case is closed. And the other guys simply mocked Minato that he was so tired of some kind of assessment, and apparently this is a common thing for what with such a level of magic. But the teacher approached Minato and began to tell him not to attach much importance to this, because the amount of magic is not the whole picture. But Maria understood that this was certainly strange, and Minato's real strength was such that he was able to cope with the magical guard, and he must have elemental magic as well as non-elemental magic. But she had not heard that the amount of magic could be regulated. And how did it even happen to him? Maria wondered. Minato, wiping away the sweat from the fact that he had tensed up so much, finally exhaled. After all, the result he had just worked so hard on came out flawless, and the fact that the magic power needed to be adjusted as accurately as possible, and it turned out to be very tedious, but the trick worked. And this is the most important thing. As soon as the magical test was over, he walked along the corridor with Maria, and he began to ask Maria that she was also at her father's night point, but she replied that she was interested in something. But two high school students who stood in their way began to tell Maria and Minato to stop, and looking up they saw Mary's sister and some guy. Minato immediately started asking who they were, but the girl began to answer that she is the eldest daughter of the Mizuha family. Her name is Ruka, and the guy who is standing next to her is Ryuji, and they are both in their 3rd year of study. Minato immediately realized that they were from the same family along with Maria and began to ask what business they came up with. But Maria's sister, starting to walk, said that there was no one to see him anymore, and at that very second, Maria began to shake with fear as soon as she saw that her sister began to walk towards her, and immediately she asked Mary that she could not do anything against the criminals. And besides, she heard a lot about the fact that she was saved by this young man whose strength is equal to some 100, and is this true? But Maria, who lowered her head, said that it was all true. And at that same second, Maria's sister began to say in a rude tone that in studies and sports, and in magic she is inferior to her in all sorts of spheres. If this is so, then she can simply leave the academy. And at the same moment, Maria thought and remembered that her sister was always better in everything. And then when they fought in sparring, she won. And then when they used their magical power and competed, Maria did not understand why her magic was not as strong as her sister's, and the fact that she had never been able to defeat her. Maria's sister continued to say that she was not good at magic, and if she was the only one left from their family, that would be enough. But Maria still wanted to tell her that she was not a weakling. But her sister didn't even let her say a word, or said that she had better listen to what she was telling her, that she should leave the academy and start attending a regular school. And without realizing it, Maria agreed with her sister's words that she should leave the magic school. But still Maria, clenching her fist, wanted to say something to her sister. But suddenly, Minato, who was standing nearby, jumped into the conversation and told Sister Maria that she was very arrogant. But she immediately began to turn her head around and ask Minato what he just said. And our hero said that they conduct a non-stop monologue, not allowing the interlocutor to express this, and this is nothing more than arrogance. But Maria's sister told Minato that this was a family conversation, and the word was not given to a stranger. But Minato replied that it really was a conversation, because it sounded like an order to him. Well, these words really angered Maria's sister. But Minato continued to say that she should not impose her way of life, and there are no reasonable grounds for this, even if they are family members. But she replied that a reasonable person would just stop the pipe dream, and her sister doesn't have the talent for mine, and she never achieved her defeat. But at that same moment, tears appeared in Maria's eyes, and she realized that her sister was right, in that she had no talent, and remembers those moments in life when she told herself that she was talented, and she has the necessary qualities. She tried to convince herself of this, even though I myself have never won against my sister. But our hero was not sure about this, and immediately said that she would win. But Maria immediately noticed that as soon as Minato said this, he smiled. But her sister was not sure about this, and of course not right here and now, Minato answered. But then Maria's sister began to suggest that it should be held in 2 weeks as a 2-on-2 duel. Well, Minato started smiling after hearing about duels, but Mary's sister continued to say that after all these insolences, was he really thinking of running away? And with confident words, our hero still answered that he was not afraid and that he was also participating. But turning to Mary, he asked what she would do. But she was shocked by what just happened, and until the end she was not sure to answer her yes or no. But still she realized that she was very strong, she just needed to practice a little, and said that she was also participating. And when I hear these words, Minato was happy about this, and said that they decided, and that if they win, They should no longer interfere in anything other than their own business. But Sister Maria said that if they win, then Maria will leave the academy. And when leaving, Sister Maria said lastly, "At best." And a little time later, Maria began to tell Minato that she had a request for him, that she wants him to become her magic mentor. But Minato couldn't understand that he was suddenly called to the roof, and this is what he gets. And the fact that he is a low magician, and his magic power is 100, and she asks such a person to become her mentor. But Maria immediately replied that he was hiding his strength, and she had no doubt that he should be stronger even than her. And Minato couldn't imagine that she still realized that he was very strong. Maria continued to say that he knows how to become stronger, which is why he talked about defeating her sister. But Minato began to think that this type of person like her always sees everything as black or white, so she provoked him to fight, and now he doesn't even know what to say to her. But at that very moment she began to bow to him and very strongly ask him to agree. And exhaled deeply, he still agreed to teach her. But not expecting him to agree, she suddenly raised her head and asked the truth about what he just said. But he replied that, however, provided that she follows what he says and does not run away halfway. After all, he couldn't refuse when they asked so much, and the fact is that what awaits them, and the fact that it wouldn't be superfluous to help with magic, and Minato decided. And what he also said was that they would start right today, but still, he still didn't know what place to assign. But Maria suggested to him that they could go to her house. Well, as soon as they decided, a few hours later, they got to Maria's house and stood on the training ground. And as soon as Maria changed clothes, Minato looked back and began to tell her that he didn't think that she had such a huge house, but she replied that her father was one of the magical aristocrats. So this goes without saying. And while warming up, Maria still realized that she was bringing home a boy for the first time, and the fact that it looks strange from the outside, although there is nothing particularly strange about it. But as soon as Minato told Maria that it was time for them to start, she turned around and started asking why he was calling her by name. But our hero replied that her sister's name is also Mizuka, so it will be unclear who he means. And she immediately understood what was going on. But Minato said that if she didn't like that, then he could call her differently. But she still answered that she didn't mind. And at the same moment, Minato said that he wouldn't start then, and he hoped for her help. And first of all, she must answer the questions about what magic power is. Maria thought that it was very simple and began to say that this is the internal energy of the body necessary to handle mine. And the next question was about the spell. And she again began to answer that it was a program that automatically turns magical power into magic. And the next question is whether it is then possible to increase magical power with the help of intention. To which she replied that it is impossible, that the limit on the amount of magical power is determined from birth, and at a certain age its growth stops. And having answered all the questions, she began to say that this is a perfect answer, isn't it? Said with a serious expression that all the answers were wrong. But Maria could not believe her own ears. Minato could not understand whether modern mages were really so ignorant and what had happened in these 50 years. And he began to explain that firstly, magical power exists not only in the body, but also in nature. In any case, the spell has an auxiliary function, and an increase in magical power with the help of intention is possible. But Maria immediately began to answer that this cannot be, and if this were all true, the science of magic would be turned upside down. Minato in turn answered that now she may not believe him, but in any case he will explain to her the 3 questions that they just talked about. And she should now sit down, and he began to show that now she should let the magical power flow, and how she felt it, she should say about it. But she didn't understand whether it was possible to feel her at all. Minato replied that if she couldn't, then she wouldn't become stronger. And as soon as she closed her eyes, Minato touched her back. And at the same moment, magical energy began to leave their bodies. But still, our hero realized that this was not enough and began to put more effort. And as soon as a sufficient amount of magical energy was released, Minato asked if she felt, to which the answer was heard, that her back became hot, and she felt something. This was the perception of magic, said Minato. And Maria immediately began to tell Minato that this is what he was talking about before. This is what he meant by the feeling of magic, and Minato told her not to forget about this perception. After all, if she can feel, then she will be able to identify and see the magical power of natural objects. The first thing she should strive for is this, but she replied that she was the second daughter of the Mizuha family, and she would definitely cope with this quickly. But Minato thought about what happened after a decent flow of magical power, and it seems that Maria has no talent for magic. And after a week of hard training, they met again at the training grounds near Maria's house. Maria began to cry and say that she couldn't do anything at all. But Minato thought about the fact that a whole week of serious practice had passed, and she still hadn't figured out the basics. And at the same time, everyone will soon have a duel and tell her once again that he will direct the magical flow for the last time. And as soon as he reached her back, he began to release magical power again and tell Mary to open her eyes. And at that very moment, she finally began to see magical power, and very happy because she finally saw the magic. And looking at her hands, she realized that it was very cool, and she couldn't believe that she could see Manu, and the fact that now she will probably be able to see it in Minato. And turning around, she saw that she was almost invisible, and she wondered why. But at the same moment, Minato began to say that she did well and did a good job. But Maria replied that it was nothing special because it goes without saying. Minato immediately began to explain that after she learned to perceive mana, she needed to learn to control it. It is very important to monitor the amount of mana used. Her task is to use mana as efficiently as possible. If you use up all the mana, then over time it will be restored and its amount will increase. And since she has learned to perceive mana from control, there should be no problems. And they talk about something that differs from generally accepted knowledge about magic. If she can't believe it, it's okay. But Maria immediately answered that she believes, because now she trusts him completely. And then they immediately began to move on to the next stage, and she must prepare for battle. And taking off his jacket, Minato told Maria to attack. And she was already ready to fight and told Minato to show what he was capable of. And as soon as she summoned her magic circles, she immediately began attacking with her first rank of water discs. But Minato stood in the same place where he was a couple of seconds ago and saw how they flew at him. And at the same moment, Minato put out his hand. Maria noticed that her spell had disappeared. But this was the first rank, without an elemental magical barrier, and he began to say that if she couldn't break it, then she wouldn't be able to defeat her sister. But Maria continued to attack Minato because she was motivated by what he told her. And as soon as she shot water discs a few more times, Minato said that she should not forget to move, and if she stops in the battle against the mage, then she will lose. Well, as soon as the battle lasted literally a few more minutes, Maria fell to the ground, realizing that she could no longer do it. And Minato approached her and began to say that now it was his turn. Holding it out in his hand, he began to say that, in addition, if she learns to control mana, she will not need to cast a spell. And first, how she used magic, and a huge magical fire began to fly straight into the mannequin. And Mary noticed that her mana was dissipating. But magic can be used without casting a spell if it knows how to control mana. And although Maria didn't fully understand, she was still like that. She decided to ask her mentor again that she might not cast the spell, but for now it would be difficult for her. First, she must learn to simply shorten the spell, and then, when she learns to control mana, she will be able to completely abandon them. And by reducing the spell, you will get a significant advantage in battle, and will also save a lot of mana while casting them. That is, it will become stronger. And telling Minato that this is an excellent conclusion. But now they will continue because they need to consolidate the knowledge gained. Otherwise, there will be no point in it. And she must act as if she were on the verge of death. But Maria started screaming because she was scared, and that she saw that Minato was pointing his magic circle at her. And a little time later, she was lying very tired, but Minato said that they would have to do this every day. And as soon as it got dark, our hero again set out to patrol the areas. But this time, he was in the Harajuku area, because he understood that there were also monsters during the day, and no matter how much you exterminate them, they did not become smaller. And what all this would do, he didn't understand, but suddenly he noticed that. Not far away, a demonic dog approached a girl, and he immediately began to rush straight towards him to protect that man. But as soon as the monsters approached the girl, our hero immediately began to attack him. After destroying it, he asked if she was okay. Well, the girl turned out to be somehow strange or simply stupid and began to take out her phone to film it. But as soon as her camera turned on, Minato realized that there was no need to talk to her and immediately left. After all, He didn't know that she would start taking pictures, not even thanking him, and not understanding what kind of people went. And next time he simply needs to go out only with a mask. And the next day, Minato continued to study with Maria. But after long training, Maria still found herself exhausted again and fell to the ground. But sighing heavily, it still tried to get to its feet. But she spent a lot of magical power and realized that she needed to recover a little. Minato watched her and realized that there were only a few days left before the competition. Although there was progress, it was minimal. And the fact that Maria loses to her sister in everything, and he doesn't think that she can defeat her like that. But then Maria, getting up, began muttering under her breath that she might give up. But still she was always compared to her sister, and she was not better than her in anything. And the fact that she had already given up a lot of things. But from magic it definitely never seems. But I still decided to tell her that at this rate she couldn't win. But in response, he heard a cry that then he could be even tougher with her. But he did not expect this, and with a smile on his face told Maria that now he would not hold back. To which Maria replied that it would even be easier for her. And as soon as she got up, he once again explained to her what needed to be done. And stretching them out into their hands, they continued their hard training. And after some time, Maria was left without strength, and Minato had to carry her in his arms. And the next day they continued their studies. And finally she succeeded, said Minato. He heard these words. Maria rejoiced very much and began to fall to the ground and scream loudly that it had finally happened. Her mentor Minato said that she was great and she did a good job. And soon, the day of the competition began, and approaching the magic school, Minato asked her for the last time if she was ready, to which he heard the answer that of course she was ready. But raising their heads, they saw strange people and could not understand who they were. But it turned out that many reporters appeared in front of them and began asking questions so that they could say a few words about the upcoming fight in magic and whether they were in conflict with her sister. But Minato didn't understand what it was, and Maria explained to him that the battle of sisters in the Mizuha family would naturally cause the media to make noise. And Minato realized that regarding a simple battle between students, it was a matter of the name of the bloodline of the magical aristocracy. But inside the Magic Academy, on the stage near which the battle was about to begin, many magicians began to gather, and Minato, noticing this, began to ask Maria if the scale was too large, to which she replied that magical duels rarely happen, so this is a whole event. And as soon as he turned towards her, he saw that she was behaving somehow strangely. But they immediately began to be called to the stage, and Maria exploded, answering that they were already on their way. But in fact, she was very nervous, which is why her body began to become cowardly. But Minato understood that she needed support and told her to do everything in her power. And at that very moment, Maria, hearing these words, collected her thoughts. And in a confident voice, she answered no need that she would do everything in her power. And the fact that Minato is an amazing person, and his words hit Maria thought to the very heart. And as soon as Maria entered the stage, she saw her sister, who began to say that how come she didn't run away. But Maria answered her that she could not do it because she had promised herself and her teacher. But her sister thought it was absolutely incredible because she really thought she could win. You are now her sister, stronger than before. But Maria knew that she would definitely win and shouted this to her sister. But then her sister began to answer that she had really grown up in these couple of weeks. And as soon as Maria got ready, she began to closely watch her sister. And I realized that it's scary to think about the difference in the amount of magical power, and the fact that her sister is strong is a fact. But she decided that she would not give in to her and would definitely win. And as soon as the magic began, Maria and her sister prepared for battle. Well, Maria noticed that her sister did not want to attack first, and she decided to take matters into her own hands and began with a short spell casting. But her sister also jumped to the side and began to call on her magic circle. Minato observed that the constant movement tactics of the main hand was also aware of the battle between magicians, but Maria was so measured that she forgot about this tactic. So the speed advantage of the spell is now lost, and at that very second, they both began to use the first rank. And an explosion of water discs was heard throughout the training stage, after which they began to fly apart into pieces. And after that, they both began to cover their faces because the remnants of their magical water discs were flying at them. And Maria noticed that she managed to compensate and became stronger, and her sister began to say that compared to what happened before, she had succeeded and did it in just 2 weeks. And after these words, Mary was glad that she heard that her sister praised her. Well, the expression on her sister's face immediately changed, and she started asking Maria for a schmuck. She is happy. After all, she simply translated the comparison as praise, which was not praise. But now Mary's sister decided to hang up the rank. And as soon as she began to attack, Maria managed to summon a magic circle and block her attacks, but releasing another second-rank water blitz. She nevertheless knocked Maria off her feet, causing her to begin to fall on her back. And in an instant she simply flew out of the stage and ended up at Minato's feet. And as soon as Minato looked at Maria, who was lying on the ground, he realized that if this were a contest on the speed of the spell, Maria would have a better chance of winning. But her opponent surpasses her. And at the same moment, Sister Maria began to approach them and say that he was an insensitive guy who wouldn't even help her. And wasn't he the one who stood up for her before? But he replied that there was no need to help her. But Maria's sister could not understand what he was saying, and suddenly Maria began to get up, even though her body was shaking. And she began to tell her sister that this was stupidity. It was a direct hit from the second wound, and she survived. And now she definitely won't lose to her. And all she has is magic, and even if she loses in something else, she will not yield in magic. And immediately she began to call up her magic circle and recite the spell. But as soon as the spell took effect, she attacked her sister, who also defended herself with the help of a magic circle. And a huge surge of magical power began to spill out from the magic circles. But Maria continued to tell her sister that she would definitely win and would not give up like last time. But still they left her by force and she fell to the ground. And they began to say that the magic of participant Maria was exhausted and victory was in the participant's hand. Somehow she tried to get up, but she realized that nothing had worked out for her. And as soon as Minato approached her, he realized that it was a competition, and the outcome of which depended on the amount of use of magic in accordance with the coordination of magical power, and she lost in the difference in the amount of magical power as such. And Sister Maria began to say that everything became clear at this point. So this girl has no talent, and Minato should have understood this too. Well, Minato turned to her sister Maria and began to say that she really didn't have any talent. It's awkward that she doesn't see much progress, and her understanding of the essence also suffers. And the performance turned out to be weak. Well, she has good tenacity. She trained every single day to the point of stupidity, but she trained. And the result of all this is that she really lost. However, he likes hard-working people like Maria. But upon hearing these words, Maria immediately began to sob. And the fact that Maria is his student and he will not tolerate bad things being said about her. But Maria continued to sob, and she could not understand why her tears would not stop after the words she heard. And so her sister began to say what part for someone whose magical power indicator is 100. But Minato replied that this magician whose indicator is 100 will defeat her. And Sister Maria said that this is not the first time he's spoken out arrogantly like this, and since it is his will, then she will not be his opponent. And her partner, who was already preparing to go on stage. Leaving the scene, she told him to finish the appointment quickly, to which he replied that she could not speak. And as soon as it was not necessary, he carried Maria out of the scene in his arms, and placing her on a chair, he began to tell her to carefully follow his fight. But suddenly she noticed that her body no longer hurt, and the bruises that were on her body disappeared. But Minato, going to the stage, thought that for them it would look simple. So it's impossible to fight at full strength, and the magic power should be no stronger than this indicator, and necessarily without elemental, and without casting a spell. So how do you have to manage without a magical barrier? A direct hit from mine could kill him, and how can you not look at such conditions, and he cannot help but make you worry? And as soon as Minato entered the stage, the guy began to say that he would not hold back, but our hero replied that then he would also be serious. And the audience suddenly started shouting for Ryuji to not be serious and to spare that guy. And at that moment, his magical power began to circulate throughout his body. And Minato noticed that his power indicator was somewhere around 8,000, and under normal circumstances, there would have been no problems. But now that his indicator is 100, one mistake could cost his life. And as soon as the duel began, they stood up. But Ryuji, calling up his magic circles, said that there would be no pity. But suddenly, He thought about the fact that this guy really could cope with a gang of hooligans. Now he will check this with one of his strong blows, whether he can withstand all his strength. But suddenly something flew into his head and he began to lose his balance. But Minato simply attacked with one precise blow straight to his head, saying that he was late. But the spectators who watched this battle could not believe what had just happened, and was the battle really over? But that's how it was. It was the end and victory was for Minato, and Maria's sister immediately ran up to him and saw that he had lost consciousness from the blow, and she did not hear Minato casting any spell or what kind of fraud it was. But Minato told Sister Maria that he finished quickly like she demanded. Because of something she began to get angry. Maria, looking at this, could not believe her eyes that Minato had actually defeated his opponent. Well, Sister Maria began to say that apparently he was worth something, but Minato immediately answered her that she was really comparing herself, to which she said that it was all him. Tries to have the last word, and at the same moment she began to release magical power, and our hero noticed that the strength of her hand was already somewhere around 10,000, and she was definitely stronger than that guy. The judge watching the battle began to speak. Now, the composition of the second competition has accepted changes to the combat abilities of the participant. Minato began to place great hopes. Participant in this round determines the team's victory, and the second duel immediately begins. Minato immediately began attacking Maria's sister, who also began to use the magic circle to protect herself. But our hero decided that now, with his indicator equal to 100, naturally the power of magic is low. Therefore, if you don't aim at the head, there will be practically no effect, and he realized that it was better to defend himself and not move. And as soon as she blocked Minato's attacks, she immediately began to attack back. Her magical water magic began to fly straight towards our hero. But it turned out that this was not enough, and the damage to her face and hands was clear that she did not expect such a turn, that Minato simply dispelled her attack. And with her magical power, she did not cause a single bruise, and it looked like this. But the spectators watching this battle began to whisper to each other that she seemed to have hit him, and that guy didn't even get wet. Maria, who was sitting on the chair, was very happy, but did not understand what he was using now. But her sister, not knowing what he had just done, continued to attack him, and Minato simply dodged all of her attacks. And she realized that he was not using any magic, he was simply dodging. But Maria suddenly realized that magic is opposed to magic, and even though the difference in the village and Minato does not reduce it at all, and if this is not done, it will obviously be dangerous. And when it comes to the second rank, the speed and mass are different, and Maria's sister began to understand that it should not be such that he would be able to evade, and this guy has no sense of fear at all, and looks like he's thinking everything through. And this is possible if you have the ability to sense and track magical power. Perhaps you need to be quite brave for this. And then she decided that she would use her strongest spell against Minato. Using the third rank of Azure Surge, she began to attack Minato with all her strength. The spectators watching this could not believe it, because that guy would be in trouble if she hit him right. And after a bright explosion of water technology, everyone began to think that the end had come for that guy. Maria's sister, sitting on Earth, realized that he definitely couldn't dodge this. But at that very moment, the same thing occurred to her as her partner. And immediately after that, he approached her. But she raised her head and was surprised that he was safe and sound and began to ask how he got out. But he replied that he used a magical drain that absorbs magic and simply passed through it. But Sister Maria saw that behind his back there were 2 stripes from her magical attack, and realizing this, she understood for sure that he was telling the truth, and laughing loudly. She could not fully realize that he had passed right through, but she continued to laugh very loudly. And raising her head and looking at the sky, she realized that this was a complete defeat. And at that moment, the judge began to say that victory belonged to Minato. Maria caught herself and started running to Minato, asking if everything was okay. He replied that everything was fine, they won. Maria was very happy that she finally managed to wipe her sister's nose. But Ruka began to say that, as promised, she would no longer interfere and now she can do whatever she pleases. But Minato was surprised by what she just said. But turning around, he didn't need to tell Sister Maria that the wounds that he saw on Maria were mild, and it seemed that she succumbed, unlike him, to which Sister Maria began to say that this was not true. Minato said that Maria gained strength in 2 weeks, and she herself understands this, and isn't it time to stop being overly caring? Maria at the same moment began to say that she would become even stronger, so that she would not have to worry. Sister Maria replied that she believed in it. And as soon as Minato looked at the two of them, he realized that everything went better than he expected. But at that same moment, he began to feel something strange. And raising his head up, he saw that a bright red color appeared in the sky. Without thinking, he realized that this was foreign magic, that most likely this is a disaster that is approaching them right now. And at that time, in one of the school classes, hooligans were looting the personal belongings of other students. But they soon realized that there were only textbooks here. Tadano still understood that something must be different. How else could he use such magic? But suddenly, one of the guys looked out the window and was horrified by what he saw. Raised their heads, they saw that the whole sky was red, and that they did not understand what was happening. "And is it really possible that there's a catastrophe?" one of the guys said. "Because it can't be that it started." The reporters who filmed this disaster were in complete shock, as were the students who hoped that it was just some kind of phenomenon. But Minato couldn't understand why the disaster began, and whether it had anything to do with the fact that they were now in this city. And the first disaster also began here. And is this really just a coincidence? But at the same moment, a huge monster began to crawl out of the portals. And as soon as the panic began, the teacher began to tell the students to maintain self-control. But our hero realized that there was no need to hold back now, and he immediately began attacking the monsters that were nearby with his lasers. And calling on a small magic circle to increase his voice, he began to tell everyone to calm down. And as soon as they froze in place, Minato continued to say that at first there is a disaster. Only small monsters appear, and everything will be fine if you act soberly, and that everyone needs to evacuate to the gym, and they must move in groups and isolate themselves is dangerous. And telling Maria and her sister that they too should seek refuge. But Maria asked our hero what he would do, and he will go to save the people left in the school building. But the teacher asked, will he really go alone? This is reckless. Ryuji, who was standing next to them, said that he would also go. If everything was as he said, there would be no problems because he saw Minato's strength in action. And yet the teacher agreed and said that they should not act as heroes, and that guy asked Minato to say that he would not die. Why did Minato throw up his hands? Because he didn't know. But before leaving, he approached Maria and said that he would already be moving forward. She in turn told him to be careful. And that guy immediately began to tell our hero that he would go first because he was in his second year. And for them, running 100 meters in 10 seconds is easy, and will Minato have time to keep up with him? But after these words, our hero began to use his magic circles and accelerate. And as soon as he caught up with us, that guy said that he would go first. And that guy couldn't understand where he got such speed from. But speeding up, Ryuji said that she still doesn't decide anything, and he will look at his real strength, and at the same time, they will save everyone. Concentrating, Minato realized that the indicator of magical power in the school building was 58, but perhaps there were people who could not control it. And jumped up the mountain, he found himself very high and was able to clearly see the situation at the school. But when he saw the monsters in the school that began to attack the students, he realized that in this case, he would deal with them first. Approaching them, he began to activate his magic circle and attack the monsters. And while in the air, he continued to attack the monsters, but still realized that he needed to go around all the buildings. A monster behind him who opened his huge mouth and with his sharp fangs was about to attack Minato from behind. But he knew about him and raised his other hand and began to destroy him. And suddenly that guy ran into the classroom screaming, "How is the situation?" But all he saw was that our hero had dealt with all the monsters. And approaching him, he said that he trusted the evacuation of the students to him. But suddenly he turned around and started telling Minato to wait for him because it was dangerous to go alone. But as soon as he turned his head completely, he realized that the guy was too fast. And now he simply turns out to be a burden, and there is nothing to object to him. And the fact that in just a few seconds he killed a crowd of magical creatures, and without understanding who this guy even was. But Minato continued to offend, and thought that if outside the walls you can deal with magic projectiles at a time, then indoors they can hit the students, and there is nothing left but to kill them at a measured pace with low-level magic. I meet more and more magical creatures on my way. He simply destroyed them one by one and saved many students who were hiding in classrooms. Well, there were a lot of students, and they were all hiding and sensing people. The monsters gathered near them. But Minato managed to get to them, but still he did not understand that after the rescue, each time accompanying them to the gym would be a waste of time. And at this time, Ryuji fought against one of the monsters and told the rest of the guys to calm down and evacuate while he finishes him off. Another guy standing next to him began to look up and showed with his hand that there was something there, and raising their heads they saw that the guys who were flying towards them were lifted into the air by something. But he didn't understand what it was. Was this the work of Minato? And watching the guys descend to the ground, he realized that it looked like things were going well there, and the guys below would definitely cope. But suddenly he began to sense an even greater aura of demonic beasts. The girl who was cornered by demons began to understand that now the end would come for her. After all, a huge number of demonic beasts began to descend from the steps in front of her, but she no longer understood what to do. After all, her legs were simply shaking from fear, and she began to sit under the wall with the hope that someone would save her. As soon as the monsters approached a good distance to destroy her, she began to scream for someone to help her. But the girl saw that a bright light appeared and began to destroy the monsters that were near her. But she immediately jumped up, because she began to remember that this monster was destroyed in the same way as last time. And so our hero immediately landed next to her after he destroyed the monster and decided to ask the girl if she was injured. But the girl was very surprised that she saw Minato here and began to ask if it was he who saved her. But our hero scratched his head and said something like that. And helping her get up from the floor, she began to ask that then she was in a practical lesson. The battle was also he, to which our hero replied that it was such a thing. And as soon as she got to her feet, she immediately began to thank Minato for saving her twice already. The hero told her not to worry because there was nothing special here. And the girl was deeply touched by such words. But at that moment Ryuriji appeared and began to say who to save next. And Minato began to tell the girl to follow him, and then she would be safe. But moving on. Minato began to understand that there was still a decent number of people left who needed help and were waiting. There was no time in the police. They needed to be saved as quickly as possible. But at this time, many influential people gathered in another building, and their representative began to say that a disaster had begun at the Academy of Divine Magic. But other guys started saying that the disaster happened 50 years ago, and there shouldn't be any more of them. And I asked the president what the next step would be, to which the president began to answer that they were contacting the aristocracy and the Central Department of the Police Department to combat monsters, and the ground self-defense forces had already been prepared. Other men began to say that in the case of the disaster, the defense forces consisted only of magicians, and they did not have magicians capable of fighting monsters. But the president understood that this was the other side of the peaceful situation after the disaster, and most of the military spending was aimed at defense in international affairs, and the only ones fit to fight against monsters are the police and the magical aristocracy. And if the same thing happens 50 years ago, then they no longer have Ichigami Minato. And the police who were driving their car began to discuss that the disaster had really begun, and nothing happened for 50 years, which means the peaceful situation was temporary but no problems. After all, that's why they exist, which belong to the Central Department of the Police Department for fighting monsters. And they will already try to destroy all the monsters. Reporters who surrounded the helicopter near the Magic Academy said that a disaster had begun at the Academy of Divine Magic. The sky turned red and monsters appeared one after another, and the fact that within the walls of the school, monsters suddenly appeared, and they and the students evacuated to the gym. The teacher who was with the students in the gym told them that among their opponents, they only had magical animals and they could cope with them by joining forces. Other students watched the live broadcast that was broadcast outside, and it said that teachers and students are trying as hard as they can, but there are a lot of monsters, so they cannot leave the academy. And the fact that this academy was not far from the city center. Huge monsters began to appear in the very center of the city, and as soon as people noticed, they began to move in different directions. Other people watching all this from a high building understood that horror was now happening on the streets. Minato, who was in a hurry to help everyone, quickly suddenly began to think that this place was simply teeming with monsters and that things were probably gradually moving towards the second phase. The monsters that appear become stronger as the phases progress, and no matter how many monsters you kill, they do not become smaller. And until the boss is destroyed, monsters will continue to appear continuously. The boss in turn appears in the last phase, and you need to hold out until this moment. A catastrophe is truly a troublesome matter, and in total there are about 20 people. They are scattered throughout the building, so even rescue is difficult. But as soon as Minato saved everyone he met on his way, he began to decide where to go next. But in one of the classes there was that stupid classmate who was annoying our hero all the time, and he continued to fight against the monsters that were attacking him. But still, it was very difficult for him, and he realized that it was useless, and he could no longer fight back. After all, in front of them now stands a soldier of the demonic army against whom they cannot do anything. And the fact that they didn't understand why the Guardian again, and the fact that they got involved in this for a stupid reason by searching Minato's briefcase. Tadano began to cry like a little girl and say that Minato would kill him with one blow. But why can't he? But suddenly he heard the words because he is weak. And immediately after these words, there was a huge explosion of fire magic, who destroyed the guards from whom only his 2 legs remained. Put a video she will already take off your head 30 ago. What to do now? Add. Accept me. Delete video. This is a call with a machine. But raising his head, he again saw Minato in front of him who had appeared from where, and simply destroyed that monster, and leaving Minato, noticed how those guys immediately became sour without even thanking him. Tanado began to get angry because this guy saved him again. But as soon as Minato walked a few meters away, the guy started running towards him and shouting for him to stop, and ask why he saved them because he must hate him. And turning around, Minato said that there was no reason. He helped because he could only do it, and that's all. But the guys couldn't understand why he said this and why he was so kind to them, and ran after Minato. He began shouting at his back so that he would not play the fool. After all, his everything time was mediocrity and magic practically. I couldn't use how and when he managed to become so strong. Not for long thinking, Minato answered what passed. He once died in a traffic accident and was reborn. But that guy didn't understand what did death make him strong. Because he should be stronger than him, but why such? How could he become so strong? And turning around, our hero began to ask, what really he is the one who is strong. After all, the strong do not oppress weak, the weak oppress those who weaker them, and feeling superiority may cause mistaken believe that he is strong. And in reality, he doesn't even think about now fight him right now. But turning around, Minato began to walk away, leaving that guy behind, which fell to the ground from the anger of that same anger at himself. Because he knows what he was running away from, average schools of his strength did not particularly mature, and he mocked the weak till you splash out anger. Then, Minato saved him which earlier was weak, and he didn't want to lift this reality. And friends, Tadana started talking about what they had all done after all their friend escaped, thanks to Minato. Well then, only they approached their friend, saw that he was on his knees, and loud cried from that fact that he finally realized his problem. But now Minato continued fight monsters that appeared in different places. But suddenly he noticed that the guardian monster began to fly away from him. But he couldn't run far, because our hero was very fast and caught up, and immediately began to call him their magic circle and shoot. But the monster managed somehow evade our hero's attack. Seeing this, Minato called mine. The magic circle is larger and began to use it, and how only spell it was before he shot them straight into the monster, and simply wiped it off my faceland, which is why there was a huge hole. And Minato approached her and began to look around, and I understand that quantity guards increased, and at this rate it's not far from the boss. And going into the next one room, he started telling the girls to, they relaxed after all, now everything is fine. But Ryuji's guy, which was on the street, and started to get angry because Minato just took it and ran away, throwing a bunch of school children and monsters at him, who appeared from everyone's sides and started little by little surround him and drive the students into a corner. But continuing, he still managed to use his magic protect some students, and how only the monster fell, he said, what will protect everyone, and they must calm down, explore behind him. Because of what pupils they were inspired by such courage, and began to say that he was a real man. But that guy understood how no matter what was, creatures was too much a lot, and he doesn't know how to cope. But suddenly appeared. Minato said, "Need weather help." But that guy got scared and asked him not to appear so suddenly again. Minato didn't want to spend too much a lot of time and said, "What they'll go when will deal with the monsters." The same guy who stood behind him and began to say that with so many, you definitely can't handle monsters alone, and it's better to find another way. And without any words, Minato began to use his magical power and destroy everyone monsters on your ways. Literally in a few minutes, all monsters in its radius actions were amazed. Guys who watched this, they couldn't believe the battle. Own eyes that one guy destroyed everyone monsters. Well then he just finished guys hurry up started run away. Monsters raiding the road all appeared and started attack them. But our hero was nearby, so worry there was nothing to talk about, and I was simply interrupting everyone on their own paths while the students ran on. Ryuji, which he accompanied the students, started to feel weird smile because he understood what this guy is unbearable cool. And how just everyone left Minato thought about it, need to whether him to return for reconnaissance to school building. Behind the school was already going on battle, and the teacher, attacking, began to tell the students they in no way did not give up, and continued destroy monsters. Maria stood simply without strength, after she fought with his sister. She not finished yet recovered. And suddenly she started to lose balance, but my sister jumped up and was able to her catch. And immediately she began to say, "Maria, what if she can't fight, then must go inside and not be a burden?" Well, Maria, I gathered my strength and told my sister what she will fight and time rest not now. But here it is. Her sister did not expect such words from Maria. And how only she her let go, Maria started using it immediately. Magic circle and attack nearest monsters. But at the same time a guy appeared who started telling the teacher what he brought saved guys. But the teacher said that he is very fine, tried, and now he has to start them inside buildings. And how he just started it, everyone survivor students in the gym. He returned to the street and approached his sister. Maria started asking her which situation, but she answered what they, now at the limit. But here Maria started asking about Minato, and where in general he and everything is he okay? And Ryuji answered immediately that everything is fine with him because he has strength. Very a lot. And Maria I immediately rejoiced these words. Now she may be sane think and not think all time about Minato. But that guy continued to say that Minato at all cool guy and be maybe with him or not, they will overcome the catastrophe. Maria thinks so too because they are with him, necessarily will win. But suddenly the atmosphere changed and all the students began run away with fear to different sides. The teacher brought it to his head and realized what situation becomes where worse, how expected, and began to tell the students till they went into hiding, and what quickly. After all, now it has appeared very a lot of monsters, and guys understood what they're very even too much and they won't be able to them resist. And many monsters started run after the students, who they wanted to quickly hide in a shelter. Maria ran away with all our strength together with his sister and that guy, but for some reason I decided to look back, and how I just turned my head and saw that the monster was straight near. She already was ready to pounce and tear it into pieces, but appeared magical splash which destroyed the monster. That's all due to the fact that guys from magical police started begin extermination immediately. Monsters, how only entered the territory schools. After all, they're priority safety citizens, and then that's it, the rest. The disciples saw this were happy that finally arrived police, and them will already be saved. Police officer immediately started saying that now when they hear, the children are safe and he asks their evacuate in accordance with instructions. But Maria suddenly started telling the policeman what they same will fight her lush citizens need to evacuate, and they unusual citizens. And the mages are also strong and from them there will be enough help to the police coped well. But suddenly police officer agreed and started saying that hope for them assistance and they can attack monsters see. But frankly speaking, they don't have enough hands anyway, so the task has become easier. Though this is also a pitiful fact for the police. Other policemen started heal wounds, students speaking what now they will be fine. But Minato, which stood at school near window, finally saw what arrived the police, and now he can trust them situation. However, reality, that's how it is what police abides earlier troop damage and disaster incident state level, and there is no reason to the state did not prepare measures for this case. and he's afraid what this maybe be perhaps in this country where the world is driven to insanity, and how no matter what he had to do what to him, the remaining ones should and must be saved students. The reporters who surrounded over the Magical Academy broadcasts started talking, "What seems arrived, police?" But the number monsters only increases, and they don't know will cope. Are the police alone with this chaos? And citizens expect a rival magical aristocracy. After all, she is also in their time this magical aristocracy. And after all, everyone pays taxes and magic aristocracy, all will settle. And they must come how hurry up after all the only one they count on citizens, it's magical aristocracy. Time in magic aristocracy, the current head of the Fuka-Zen family began to speak to they left him alone. But the butler asked again sure whether he but Zen continued to say that, after all, with a disaster small the scale and the police can handle it. And what will help magical, there is no need for aristocracy. And after a short conversation, the head of the Fuka family said that he's coming rest. And after closed door, butler wished to his Mr. pleasant dreams. And in this time, police continued fight magical demons, and one of police officers understood what seems situation becomes all worse and worse. And I asked my comrade can whether they clean up the area entry from monsters, to what that answered what impossible there too much a lot. And what speed appearance, monsters higher how it was supposed, and there is no possibilities evacuate citizens. And the fact that the strength of the defense itself are limited logistical support and are not yet ready for action, and hope remains only for magic aristocracy. However, with her completely no contact, and here you go. What is magical aristocracy in their time? No, there is no help. And I continued destroy countless quantities demonic animals who advanced from everyone's sides. Still a policeman? Understood what he knew the information, but the real catastrophe is still disaster. For this too, people opposed at that time. But what will happen? When will appear boss? After all, now monsters very many and all of them miscellaneous type from weakest to strongest, but magical power about students and policemen is not eternal, and it is early or late will end. At the same moment, the earth began to shake, and everyone around were horrified at the sight of what appeared demonic boss. And he was so terrifying that at first glance he inspired unlimited quantity horror. The policeman is with the guys began to cower from fear when he just one form. And how he just started to approach all closer and closer police officer, I'm still convinced what this is it, boss demon. And what this is the monster, rarely you'll meet them in time, can defeat it only magical aristocracy. And necessary magic 5th rank or higher, and such ranks here no one can use. And at the same moment, the boss began to call as many as 3 magic circles and attack guys fiery by the elements. How about Maria? Only saw this I was completely scared fingers. But she's lucky that she's nearby. Her sister was standing there and she began to call on her water elements and attack in response. But immediately after this she took Maria and began to run away with her. But here explosion was so strong that Mary's sister hugged her sister to protect her on drums. The wave hit her straight to the back, and she immediately began to fall to the ground in pain. Maria, looking at her sister, could not understand what it was happened. But her sister started talking Maria to, she ran away and what quickly. But she petrified with fear and horror, whom only what saw though her comrades ran away with everyone legs behind her back. But he took his sister in his arms and began to scream so that she could at least someone helped. But everyone else guys or ran away or the police which continued fight the monsters that were advancing. And there was no one business to help someone. After all, they themselves were in a terrifying dangers. And the boss began to call 5th rank flaming column and direct it towards people. But how only police saw this counted impossible, and what they are just now will die from this attack. Maria continued screaming for help, and for Minato came to them and helped him, and she shouted to Minato for the last time for him to come and help them after all. Now they will simply die. And after this, rang out loud explosion, and suddenly boss stopped and stopped attack. Because he saw how you stood in front of him strong, the man and Minato started talking to Maria that he apologizes for what late, and what forced her wait. Now he'll figure it out, absolutely, they too will be safe. But Maria lowered his head to his started telling my sister that she very hard breathes. Minato came over, I also told them that everything's okay, she just lost consciousness. And now she just needs a little relax and gain strength. I realized all heavy situations Minato saw what near him was very a lot of wounded students and police officers, because of which he began to get very angry and get up, with the words that he is now will overcome this boss in no time. But Maria looking at him, I immediately believed his words because he is now was very she's serious too. More, I've never seen him like this. And at the same moment, under everyone's feet from magic circles appeared among the students. And Maria couldn't understand what it was this and where it comes from it came. But turning attention to your sister, she understood what her wounds are healing. And all the other students began feel a surge of strength. And suddenly police looked out from behind the door, and I realized what this holy magic third-rank sacred heal, and even she doesn't own it. And going to his senpai, she asked what did he answer? What the magical power was already exhausted, but by some miracle, it recovered. But here it is. The police couldn't figure out what it was such occurs. And her senpai answered that he himself doesn't fully understand. However, them need to protect citizens. Though this it was reckless and they could have died, but they must fight otherwise everyone will killed. Well, here's his partner thought, what this useless? After all, if you look back you can see what police was destroyed, and they the only ones who remained on their feet. And what's worse is that the self-defense troops are not magical. The aristocrats will not come, and they are at a dead end. And what huge boss moves straight at them with his army? And how only reporters saw the whole situation. They thought that this some kind of mistake after all police was broken, and this end. And what is from the magical aristocracy there's no point, and they're all here will die. And there is no one who maybe fight and defeat no one these demons. But still they didn't know that there is one person which will be able to destroy everyone them. And at this moment, the police saw that the student began to move towards the monsters and began to shout to him, "What did he really want? Die, and he must leave from there quickly." But Minato got up against huge boss, which released incredible magical power. And he understood the boss already has a lot of his own. He was taking liberties, and now he needs to be calmed down. But it's creepy creature which came at our hero and started shouting that he would kill each and every one. And students who heard this started tremble with fear. Police who stood just nearby heard this voice in my head, which said that he is there will kill and grind into small pieces. At the same moment it sounded huge explosion, and our hero, who raised his hand and began to attack huge boss, which moved towards him. But here huge the boss started screaming at the top of his lungs and attacking Minato in response. But our hero understood that he's serious related to this during worldwide disaster, but now to him need to be calmer so as not to catch up fear on others. And with the help his magical barrier, he began to stop. All attacks that came against him were flying, and police which saw this understood what quicker all that guy has already been killed. But after the strongest attack, his huge wave explosion rushed straight towards the students who stood behind our hero. But how only she reached them and found herself in front of them barrier, which our hero created by lifting your hand and activating one attack with one hand and the other barrier. But how only he was convinced what guys are okay, he started switching both magic circle to attack and shoot with your lasers straight at the monster. Like a policeman, only I saw it. And you couldn't understand what happening and who at all this student. Reporters continued film that battle. They say that they don't know who is he, but the student fights monsters, but his face is not visible, and they want to get closer to consider he's like that too. But at the same moment, a magic disc arrived straight into the camera and destroyed her. Maria next to me understood what must be Minato hid your strength. Now she calmed down and maybe fight. And I continue release countless quantity magical lasers which attacked everyone enemies in the area. The students noticed this and began rejoice what that guy is very steep they finally saved. But we didn't have time, they calmed down, how saw what else was in front of them. A lot of demonic animals. But how only they attacked the students their struck magic blow, which arrived from the policeman which stood nearby, and he began to say that, here there is work for them, and they must help that guy. Minato turned around, saw what modern police same not bad copes. But to him now you can't get too distracted because it's standing in front of him, the one he owes destroy to protect everyone's students. But the boss began to radiate incredible magical power and shout to the entire surrounding area and call whole 6 magical circles. The police saw what this 6th rank of magic and magic level magical aristocracy. Students who stood nearby horrified that saw. Just like reporters looking up the mountain, they couldn't believe it own eyes. The policeman who defended children understood what now them quicker total will come end. But how only happened huge explosion right in front of them. The students raised their heads and began notice something strange. And by young woman police officer defended children, she began to pray for God to help protected them students. The policeman understood what for how long would I wasn't strong, that student they doomed. But Maria believed that Minato will cope and win. After all, she believes him, and he will win whatever come what may and will protect their everyone. Minato, looking up at the boss attack, understood what weight, gigantic but slow, and that demon arrived unreasonable, used 6th rank. But in the meantime he cannot defeat him with the 2nd rank. But he didn't want it to happen to him, paid attention. But now there is no other way, and he have to release sufficient quantity energy. And with the help synthesis of magic 4th wounds, Minato's storm of betrayal began to take effect. The policeman noticed what this gigantic water snake and what this is a synthesis of magic. And at the same moment, a huge one pushed you lonely type snake, whom released Minato with the fire dragon, who released boss. Well, there you go, boss Cataclysm, I couldn't calm down, and that's it repeated that he will kill each and every one. And after long-term battles, but still a battle, it's over, and boss Cataclysm was destroyed. How only Minato looked at the destroyed one. The boss started saying that he has no self-control, and he thought, this will take more time, but he turned out to be weaker how expected. And at the same moment the sky began to become normal, and looked up. Minato understood what does it look like after victory over the boss. The disaster has passed, and now you can calm down. Students realized it's at the end after all understood what they demons are saved, too defeated the guy standing in front of them. They started bounce be very happy that all it's finally over. Reporters in tears started jump in place. The boss was defeated and they saved. And now everything is in order for them, and the disaster has finally passed. The policeman couldn't believe, so that the demon is overcome by the student, and he is uncertain coped would even magical aristocracy. But falling to the ground he realized that his legs can't support him anymore. Minato began to approach Maria and said that he had finished what she answered what she very believed in him, and immediately began to thank him for saving her. No need answered, that he was happy to help her and everyone to the rest. But suddenly they noticed that it ran towards them crowd schoolchildren, which throughout weeks started all-time pester Minato, talking about what everyone is saying about him. After all, he saved everyone. I didn't hear the students that he was transferred to S class, but suddenly ran up the girls started telling the guys what they interfere, and even thoughts don't arise. What them you can't communicate with him. And they immediately started telling Minato to tell him how did he become so strong, and can all the thing is that it's in it flows blood aristocrats. On another student sitting on the next one, the desk began to say that Minato starred after all this, Xie, aren't be true to such by force possessed by the student. But other students immediately attacked him with the words that knows is he what? Tired of the demon and the fact that he himself is pathetic. So they pester him too. No matter how they look, he's all time carries some kind of nonsense. And taking advantage of the moment, Minato decided go out from class while they were arguing with other students. But at that moment she began to approach him Maria, with the words that looks like someone has a problem. But Minato answered her too, she wasn't mocking. Maria continued to say that he is a hero who everyone defended and nothing can be done about it. But Minato started asking Maria what after all her same decided to transfer to S class. But this all thanks to distinction in the duel and for participation in the disaster. But Minato couldn't understand why she is not happy. But Maria said that she is glad that there is only one person there. But suddenly Minato asked Maria, how's the condition? Her sisters, she answered, what everything is complete okay and what they. Now we started talking to her more former. And what really fine thanks to Minato. And I'm very glad that he is always was there and protected her. But suddenly our hero raised his hand and struck Maria right on the forehead. Well, there you go, Maria didn't expect this. She started asking why he was with her, so Minato answered, what for gratitude once is enough, and no need repeat this every minute. She still was. I'm glad every time saw Minato that he's everything time is near. But this time in the president's office continued meeting. And he started asking the participants meeting what's on this teleconference between countries finished, but they started reply, what help for the future disaster will difficult, and because other countries overloaded, and talking about what boss on top of student place where all happened. It was in chaos, and the police almost lost consciousness should be, this still some kind of error. Chapters countries. Same subjected this doubt which goes without saying, of course, and how no matter what was, they must send magical aristocracy to their homeland and hold a conference on measures to prepare for the next disaster. And that's it, press conference was finished. But this time on the roof building schools, met Maria with Minato and her sister together with your partner. And Maria's sister started talking to Minato. What does she have? I have a request. She wants for him to take her as his students. A few days earlier, Maria sat near his sisters on the bench. Her sister began to say that apparently he stopped the catastrophe. Maria answered that it is so Minato on top of the demon boss using magic synthesis fourth cities. But she couldn't believe it. These words not even all are high mages category master synthesis. But Maria I immediately answered her that it's true after all she own and eyes this saw. Her sister answered what she believes and cannot be to she lied. But Maria couldn't understand why she thinks what she won't lie to her because she always was decent, honest, incapable lie, good, serious and diligent. So I thought that she shouldn't to be a magician without talent. But it looks like her an approach was too much cruel. Maria was very touched with these words, and blown up she started telling her sister what will become more stronger, so much so that she could be calm. Her sister started saying that she's already really adult. But this time she thought that Minato's real strength is not level school, and probably he even stronger her father, but also she. I decided to ask my sisters about one things. After all, if take into account current, the situation is better case. She is an advanced magician and needs help Minato to become more stronger. And now she started talking about what she apologizes for insulting Minato and looking at him condescendingly, and she's really sorry. And she understands perfectly what this is a selfish request, but how there wouldn't be, it's a shame. But she asks. To exactly that please took her as a student. But without any hesitation he answered, what will take her in the student? Well, there you go. She couldn't understand why, and Minato answered, what she kind of strange she asked for it herself. Well, here we go. She answered what she after all I was cruel to him in many ways. Minato answered her that she apologized, so he decided to forgive her, and she asked, and he accepted her request, that's all. But since she did not expect such an answer, and did not at all think that he would accept her, she simply stood in a stupor. Well, there you go. Another guy immediately walked up and started talking to Minato. What then? He goes to him also with a request, and our hero immediately agreed because 1 or 2 there was no difference. Maria, standing near his sisters, started saying that that's the kind of person he is. Amazing guy who helps everyone who ever insulted him or humiliated. Well, a little later, guys. We were sitting in the teacher's office. Guy and girl, which sat opposite at the beginning, speaks that not from the Central Department Policeman Monster Control Department. And they now start with gratitude, and thanked Minato from everything hearts. Because if it weren't for him, they would all citizens would killed. Minato began to say that they are throughout total policeman interrogation, have expressed gratitude many times, and have already enough, and he asked for what they business this time. But the police started saying that they finished investigation into a recent incident catastrophe. But there is still more some interesting moments. Then what his abilities for magic awakened after automotive accidents in this too question no doubt because they have certificate the people around him. But there is also something like that indication accident as if changed his personality. And what the character has changed, and the magic abilities have become unusual strong. And so that he is capable defeat any demon. Maria immediately started telling the police to, they waited after all which this it has value. But the policeman I understood immediately what I asked wrong question and decided to change it. And started asking nose is he wearing black mask? But Maria and Minato are not completely understood what does he mean. And showing the video on the phone to the policeman said that the magician hides in the night killing monsters and helping people in trouble video distributed on the internet and does not know. Is he like that? Nominee looking at them, I realized what now he understands what he's talking about. And that's the point. Maria continued to ask how this connected to the cop and does he really look like that kind of guy? But the policeman answered what similar physique and height. And apparently the magician in black is also Master Few. Mages are capable of such a thing in such a time as a young man age, and also the date of commencement of his activities close to its release date from hospitals. The teacher understood what application magic on the streets without permission or qualifications is business illegal and being a student at his academy, available certain discretionary freedom of action academy. But in case such wide eyes on the stove there is no other choice except how act as one of, except from educational establishments it won't work out. But if he confesses, they will do all possible to mitigate punishment, and he answer must with caution. And a policeman asked again, "The question is whether he is a magician in black," to which our hero replied, "What, this is not true." But the policeman immediately smiled and said, "What if that's it? Oh well," and asking for an apology for disturbing. They said that for today everything, and then they'll go. But really, in fact, he understood. What, no, the slightest fluctuations, if he is still a magician in black. Then courage. It's not hard to believe him that he is just only high school student. There's still something behind him. There is, he thought, and he's completely sure what Minato, that guy in black, and the voice and atmosphere next to him, looks like he's starting activity. It has target help we need. And he can't say to the leader about his true personalities because he could be removed from office policeman. But he thinks that since he saved him, he is a good man. But still, he finds out his true face and this total only case time. At the same time, the teacher started talking to the class. What this Minato and Maria today they will study in the second year of Class S, and all that is in class must be friendly with them. And how, as soon as he sat down at the desk, the other guys started approach him and ask what it was he who actually defeated the demon. "And what is it like, this being a magical aristocracy?" asked girls in Maria. But the teacher asked everyone to take their places after all the lesson begins. And after lesson already, Minato and walked along the corridor and understood that before the change, he was showered with a barrage of questions about one of the reasons why he didn't want to stand out. But suddenly he heard that someone called him, and the girl who stood behind him began to ask can leave it for 1 minute. Minato didn't understand why was he called to the roof again. There is some custom. That's why here name is, when there is matter. But on this one roof there was also Maria. After all, she wanted to practice alone, but she didn't understand how turned out to be here Minato. "More. There is some girl, and what are they doing there? Got interested, Maria." But that girl started asking Minato remembers is he her? To which our hero replied that he doesn't remember. But she started saying that Minato saved her during disaster, and then our hero remembered. But she continued to say that the magician also saved me in class, present battles, when attacked magical animals, and that magician was she asked Minato. Our hero still remembered that moment in the abandoned city, and the girl began to thank him for saving her twice. But Minato answered she didn't pay attention after all. He saved only because could. Out of embarrassment, she told Minato that he is very cool. Maria, hiding around the corner. I couldn't hear properly their conversation. What are they talking about? She wondered. But girl suddenly shouted that Minato really likes her like it, and suggested it to him meet. Maria, having heard this, I couldn't believe myself that she confesses his feelings Minato. Well, our hero stood simply in shock from the fact that heard. The girl said that she did not have any merits, but she will do all possible, so he should let her be his girlfriend. But Minato began to thank her for her feelings for him, and after these words, young woman standing against him, I was delighted. But still he said what, however she must excuse him. But he can't have a relationship because he already has affairs, which costs due. But the girl bowed to him. I immediately started smiling. And getting up, she told Minato what she grateful him for Yasni the answer, and she come to terms with it. But how only she turned around and began to walk away on her face, tears began to appear. But Minato started to say why she wouldn't come around the corner anymore, Maria. But she, how only looked out and said that after all she neutralized magic. Minato said what the magical power is so badly coordinated, which is obvious. But to him it was still there interesting, and he asked Maria, does she really like it? Peak. But she started to answer what this accident she didn't want this do. And she immediately started asking Minato why did he reject that girl, and did she doesn't seem cute. And turning around, I need said that he is not going to start a relationship with anyone. And before total age difference, too much big, and even physically, they identical. But Mary here was unclear why doesn't he want to with no one meet. But at that moment, she couldn't understand why she relieved sighed. And I go down the steps, Maria. I still thought about it, Minato doesn't want to with no one meet. But suddenly he turned around and started talking Maria to. She tried to regulate magical strength, or else he's watching training not enough. But Maria answered what she knows it herself, and there is no need to remind her she will work for 3. And what she will try and will stronger, so how much need to, so that he admitted. But how it's just night. Minato again went out for the night patrolling, but he noticed that he ended the disaster, and the monsters did not decrease. And really, this omen knew disasters. But suddenly he heard the girl's screams, which I asked for help, Some kind of robber chasing him said what nobody not here at this hour, and how only that the robber began to attack a girl appeared in front of him Minato, and grabbed his hand and began to block his magical power, for that the robber could not understand what comes from and where took on this guy is wearing a mask. But immediately after this, Minato hit him with all strength with your fist in the stomach, and after this activated Mind Magic Circle. He hit him again because of what that guy started flying off a few meters back, and how only that guy fell to the ground. Minato understood what this is: a magician amateur outside law and in close combat. However bad, I'm not used to fighting other magicians. Young woman, I immediately started thanking our hero and says, what really? He's the one, the most mage in black. But didn't have time, she understands it how our hero eluded her. She only brushed it off his hand with words for him to wait through a little. And moving in the air, he understood that the magician in black the students said about him at school, and obviously it was him. But he didn't understand why everything is so common. The next day when our hero sat down eat along with Maria and his sister and Ryuji, names, he started asking about the magician in black, and everyone is talking about him, and as far as he knows, he is a magician. Outside law, which acts at night, about him the disciples also spoke, and now he became interested why. Ryuji answered immediately to our hero that he uses also because of its popularity on the internet. Nominee. I immediately asked them what's such internet, and Maria immediately started talking to her, what's in my sister's ear. Maybe Minato in technology doesn't understand at all, but she didn't understand. Is it possible in their time you may not know about the internet, and she certainly noticed that he is far from everyday life fuss but to so much. But Maria began to say that the internet is informational communication net, connecting the whole world, and it can enjoy anyone, therefore information distributed by fast, there is one like that thing, how photos and videos, so information a lot. And the fact that everything is on the smartphone can look at Minato too. There is first need to open application. But suddenly he was very happy that he had happened open browser. And guys started right away, be happy for him after all, now he can enjoy internet. Sister Maria started asking mentioner, what by the way saying he promised take them for training, but when they will start she doesn't understand. Minato has already answered her that he can begin after lessons, once they taught him how he will teach you how to use a smartphone. They're everything why they want. But at the same moment, Maria had a strange feeling, premonition. And for good reason after all, after workout they all lay exhausted on the ground. And our hero began to tell them what this only it was the beginning, and they must do all as if they are on the verge of death. But guys all of a sudden blew themselves up and started saying that this all it's not over yet, and he shouldn't there underestimate. I won't show you him fortitude. And counting this is a good mood, and didn't continue train. And every one of them called Mind Magic Circle and began to attack Minato. Into this time in the area Tokyo television towers. Police. We watched the situation and couldn't believe it. His eyes after all, nothing was foreshadowed troubles. And through binoculars they saw something that made their body tremble with fear. But what they didn't see in front of them is that a bunch of demons and walked straight towards them. What happened during training was guys again exhausted themselves and sitting on the earth began understand that they have run out after all magical power. Minato has already started asking what's wrong with them. Really they are already at their limit. But raising their hands they again started call upon magic circles and attack our hero yet. But Minato simply blocked all their attacks and immediately began to counterattack there with their lasers, which arrived them straight to the head. But at that moment, Maria found herself behind our hero, screaming, a gap, and immediately began to shoot their military discs. But Minato, turning around, was able to dodge this attack and tell her that no, he has no gap. And how only she understood what Minato dodged. The same one shot his magical force and hit her in the forehead just like the others. But soon Minato started talking to the guys, what now will break, and they were very, very happy hear this. After long-term workout, they started quench I'm thirsty. And sitting near the house on a bench, they started understand what more never been so tired as today. Ryuji flowing out then began to ask Minato not too much. Is he strong? But Sister Maria added that so strong, what she is the top of the academy and is not able to compete with him. And the fact that his level really not student level, but how only Maria I looked nominee. Understood what does he have face? How always? How as if to him all tired of it. And he immediately started saying that he almost died in an accident. and when woke up took possession force and reason unknown. That's why clarification, they must leave. And guys all of a sudden understood what means dying experience is reason awakening and such case nothing amazing. They both too much simple-minded. If look at his face he's said to get off. But there's probably a reason why he can't speak if he's still hiding. It seems better. Stop find out. At this moment Minato I looked at the guys and understood what they are all simple-minded. And a little time later the guys were walking down the street and Ryuji began to say that he understands this. There is real training. Minato answered to him that he is strong. But Ryuji started saying that to him, I want to there is, and for him, how will return home still cook the brat. But Minato was, I'm surprised because he knows how to cook. After all, if you can't tell by looking at it, even though he didn't understand what this could mean. But suddenly he started asking Minat, does he really only eat at home? That answered that no, basically brews a cup of ramen, because the world has become nowadays very convenient. But Ryuji couldn't understand a healthy lifestyle would destroy him. But Minato couldn't understand why he was so towards him stuck after all. He is not even his father. And at that moment he said, Minato, what it's decided he'll go to him and he'll cook for him too. Food, and what this is not discussed. Minato. I understood immediately what this guy is assertive and there's no other way to put it. Later some minutes we got home to that guy. And on Minato, his brothers and sisters immediately attacked. But Ryuji began to apologize to Minato for have to look after tomboys. But Minato answered, what, nothing like that, but suddenly that guy believed in shock that I saw what he used magic in the house and even on children. And what I didn't understand, where this herd used magic for fun, but the children asked, no need continue after all, them very liked it. But he said that he's a little made me angry this their big brother, therefore they now calm down. But still I didn't expect Ryuji what Minato fine gets along with children. On remembering last life and the fact that chaos reigned in the world where first victims were children. Minato more than understood what children are treasure. But here Ryuji suddenly started talking no need, so that he stops talk, as if old grandfather what? Minato answered to him, what? Who would said after all? He himself is the same. But still they decided sit down at the table to eat. And immediately the children attacked the food, eating her with a huge joy. But how only Minato he suddenly put food in his mouth felt. Something he hasn't experienced for a long time, such pleasure from food. And the fact that he haven't eaten for many years home, I'm going, and by continued war normal, there was no food. But suddenly Minato, I decided to ask the guy about his parents. Why? That answered, what there is no father, and mother works until the very end, nights. That's why housekeeping and taking care of the urchins on it, and in his free time he works part-time. Minato understood what he has things to do very a lot, but that guy smiling answered what it's hard but he doesn't complain, for what it became immediately clear to our hero. And what like, how more difficult the more lit said Minato to your new friend, and how only they. We all finished dinner together, lay down rest. But Ryuji, suddenly Minato started talking so that he apologizes for what, because of whims, kids had to him spend the night. But Minato answered, that's nothing to talk about worry after all. Sometimes it is possible. And at that moment, that guy thanked Minato. Our hero answered to him what is not needed thanks to no Ryuji meant gratitude for Sister Mary. After all, she began to glow more the same. And he thinks thanks to him. But suddenly Minato understood what this something romantic. And decided to ask in Ryuji, like whether what does his sister Maria need? That answered what in no way case. And the fact that he and she don't fit in and the fact that they carry out time together, it came out naturally. But after hearing these words, Minato understood that he is somewhat similar to them. And the next day, they together returned to the magical academy. Maria is together with his sister were waiting there with the words that we were late. But Ryuji said, what Minato? I couldn't wake up. But Maria couldn't understand whether they spent the night together, and really this some kind of training. Minato couldn't understand why them need to wait meeting, but counted that there's nothing here, there was nothing special. But suddenly he raised his head, and saw police officers which came up to him and started saying, that can whether they take up a little of his time. But our hero could not understand why they every day to him come asking to talk. To the police apologized to him but said that they had an emergency matter. And the fact that Tokyo District Television The towers are filled with monsters, and since there is a high probability what this associated with the disaster, they came to ask for cooperation. But he answered them that he is a student forbidden use magic outside schools. Police more responded immediately that he's the one who stopped the disaster alone, and the fact that he does not fit into the framework of a simple student. And they say frankly they can't handle it yourself. And since he sees what police themselves, they say enough evidence that they cornered. And what they are from the heart, ask help so that he can help him. Minato immediately started answering, what if he is useful, so be it will help. And honestly, he would chose not to stand out, but doesn't think so. What maybe them say about it? The policeman began to say that of course he will negotiate the reward from the academy, and he doesn't have to worry about it. Maria, together with his sister and that guy, they also said that they will help too, will support his rear. To the policeman answered that he is grateful for the desire, but they cannot help. But at least the girls said that they are in the top of this police academy counted what this. Even so, they talk about the level present battles, and equals whether they're the forces that have Minato, he asked a question. Guys immediately thought that said police officer after all. They themselves understood what they are not that strong and only them become. How only they agreed, policemen said guys so that they don't go to the academy. But lastly Minato said to the guys didn't relax, and trained with all strength and soon they will definitely catch up with him. The guys a surprised looked nominee and were inspired with these words, and I turned around to the academy. They were ready train every day, even several times a day to become stronger. A little time later, police together with Minato arrived in Central Police Management. And everyone employees the man began to say that near hundreds demons appeared in the surrounding area Tokyo Towers, and with them it is necessary figure it out before they will cause damage to citizens. And they asked for help from a student who accepted active participation in the recent disaster erupted in the academy. And the man asked Minato for him to stand up and greet everyone, the rest guys. But guys started right away, whisper behind his back, how did such a boy get into this place? And they say he won boss recently. Incidents on other foals could not do this believe. But the police girl, which I saw that battle on my eyes, started to feel ashamed those guys which sat behind her. But at the same moment, the guy as a policeman took microphone in hand and began to speak. What Minato student stopped development disasters at the academy, and he personally saw his actions up close, and few people are so good like him. And what this human accepted participation in the disaster which began in the first decade, and they consider his cooperation extremely necessary, and they should not treat him as a student, and treat him as an employee. But here police officers in end started due to the fact that he is only the boy got in the way, there where must act professionals. But the main thing, environment, the police started saying that the person is not from this environment, but they do the same must immediately but begin extermination monsters and everything busy their posts. And how everyone just started our hero noticed to disperse that those two there were definitely guys unhappy this decision. But the police all of a sudden he approached Minato and began to ask forgiveness for those guys. But our hero answered, what everything is fine, and he understands why doesn't he treat it like that. The policeman immediately understood that he really adult, but still he thought, what did you do in comparison with them? Sanada. But she went up to the policeman and started saying that she was going to their stop but got scared. Our hero still continued to say that they forgot about it, after all it doesn't matter. Sanada was very happy because our hero still existed. Very kind person. And how only they got into the car and started go to the place, our hero asked the police about the incident, what's his approx combat power? But the police answered, what about 80 small and most average level more high person? And thinking about it I remembered what average level can enjoy magic until the second A-level cities up to third. And it's a pity admit, but policemen said that he is the only one who maybe use magic synthesis 4th rank, which means will be on the strongest. And regarding tactics, they will see exodus battles happening in the open terrain, using only, there is no such thing as magic tactics. And the problem with magic creatures and with guards will not arise. But intelligence creatures like demons and creatures stronger, where above so necessary countermeasures cannot be fought head-on name strategy. And judging by the fact that the weapons are in sight, there is no weapon which maybe compete with mine, and monsters and much more are fighting only in a form convenient for movement or a suit. But suddenly Minato asked the policeman, What wind earlier there was weapons against monsters. But a policeman answered that it is possible meet somewhere and now, but his search still the same task, and it has for only magic aristocracy. And thinking about the fact that there were no weapons, our hero did not understand how did this happen. After all, there was one before there's enough, and you can't say anything except like, what magic steel level, where below? And what he didn't understand what happened during these 50 years. Later some hours they finally got their communion and began go out with their cars. And how only Minato looked at the monsters, he understood what a disaster like such hasn't unfolded yet, but quantity creatures unusual a lot. And suddenly he thought, what is it occurs? But other policemen started look at those hordes of monsters and believe eyes they couldn't, because it turned out where more how was stated in the report. And besides, there are demons here. There are them too, after all. They won't be able to compete with them, and they should turn to the magicians for help, civil or magical aristocracy. But the head of the police answered these questions what requests sent, but they hardly received the quantity from the cabal monsters and magicians outside law will increase throughout country, so now all overwhelmed work. And you get what fight will only they, but the guys counted what this suicide. The policeman decided to ask the Minut will handle it whether he, to which our hero replied, what everything's okay to him, I can do it. But here suddenly their stupid police started telling our hero to shut up. She is not there, and succumbed mood and builds from feel cool here, and what they won't be able to, they're overcome. But at that very moment, they turned everything around attention to the monsters noticed that something has changed, and looked at Nissa and didn't see. How monsters started lift up your hands up and publish your sounds are very loud, and looked up the mountain and didn't understand what a disaster begins. And in all police cars on the radio started saying a message from Central Policeman Management in all departments, that the catastrophe is beginning dial revolutions throughout country. And they repeated once again that the catastrophe is beginning revolutions throughout the country and all people need to move to safe place. And the first priority is the rescue townspeople and they ask operational measures to combat the disaster. And in addition, priority is given to measures to combat the disaster in large cities and what reinforcements to others places missing. Those weird ones, the police couldn't believe it that the disaster began and how this at all happened. But our hero understood that a catastrophe is a phenomenon of spontaneous occurrence. But now, this looked like her called monsters and incidents 50 years of disaster. Now they cause her. But those are strange police. They started saying that they couldn't do without support, and how could they not look? Now them need to reconsider preparation for attack. But Minato began to tell the head police officers what now Job started, and all the monsters started move straight to the city center. And what if they can't be stopped will suffer citizens them. There will be nothing left except how to pacify them. Means began to go to certain death. Those cops talk behind the others' backs, guys. But the Minotaur and the other guy began to object to him that they don't have a chance, get the better of so many monsters. And at the same moment Minato tired of it. Listen those fools, and he decided jump out straight to the monsters. And while he was flying he saw what they started gather everything in one heap. And how he just landed monsters? Little by little they began to surround him. And when he got up he realized, what now to him cost give it your all. After all, monsters started to react very quickly and straight away jump on him, their sharp claws and teeth. Well, there you go, guys who were on the bridge began to shout that now they will kill him and he must hurry up, run away from there. But our hero began to use mine third-rank windy cutter and destroy everyone monsters who were approaching him. The police are surprised watched as our hero dealt with and destroyed monsters left and right. Head of police looking at this was happy that took this guy with me. But literally after a few minutes all the monsters who attacked our hero were destroyed. Well, the guards remained, which were they are nearby too started. Weird react no Minato. And at that moment, they started activate their magic circles and attack our hero. A huge flurry of attacks began to reach no need to, but that managed activate mine. The barrier and their attacks were simply useless. And what he could protect yourself without magic barrier, but he there is audience. So for now he must not forget about the barrier. And understood. This. He turned his hand and began to attack monsters which attacked him. And police, which looked at this battle, surprised such huge strength, because he didn't understand how many elements does it use. His magic, and yet to no one except he won't succeed, repeat this. But still they understood, what they shouldn't just stand and watch, and the policeman started shouting to the others guys they went to help him. But the police who stood behind nevertheless, they simply watched and shook with fear at the sight of how many monsters stood in front of them, and started saying what heard somewhere to professional ran away shaking with fear, and they shouldn't keep up with that guy. And at that very moment, they started fight against terrifying monsters gathering all his strength. Minato turning around seeing that's what I was thinking about. They're not that bad as he thought. But this time the demon began to emerge, and from a huge portal and straight Mycom approached the police who stood towards him closer everyone. And the police saw him understood. What their ranks it's not enough and you can't beat him, if only they are not legendary magicians. But how only he got quite close distance to police Minato noticed this and began to attack him. And he started telling the police that he will deal with demons, and he instructs the rest policemen. But those guys continued doubt our hero and say that he will not defeat him. But still they continued. Kill monsters hasn't shown up yet. Boss, here you go, demons and creatures stronger, they will be left to Minato. But our hero is fighting understood that 60 years ago a catastrophe broke out all over the world, and it was first and since then disasters arose repeatedly derail the world. And if story what was 60 years ago it will happen again. The horror for the floor is gone, the whole world. But this time he is here and will not allow humanity to be destroyed. But suddenly near police officer girls which healed other guys. The guardian appeared, and how only she turned her head towards him and saw that he swung at her. But this time flew up Minato and activated mine. He immediately began to attack the magic circle monsters in response. Young woman police, which I looked nominee, I remembered. What, it's the same, how it happened last time too. When the guy in the mask saved her once upon a time in the city, and Minato turned around and started asking the girl if she was okay, whether she and help her get up. But she thanked him and said that now everything is fine. But he began to understand what now situation the same as it was earlier. Really she recognized him. But the girl didn't understand for what to him the activities of the magician in black and why he is so strong. But how he just turned around I suddenly thought it would arise whether disgust if she will ask to him these questions. But suddenly understood what she thinks that he is a student and cannot think about something strange. And how only I raised my head and saw what by she was thinking. Then a lot of people had already approached the monsters. But she was lucky that Minato was nearby, because he simply raised his hand and began to destroy them with the help their lasers, and telling her that here dangerous and she must be a little gatherings, and now she should not leave his side. But after thinking he realized what apparently she can't use combat magic. But girl police officer continued look at our hero with surprise and at the same time pride, and doesn't understand this fact that he really is a student after all he behaves more mature how she. Other policemen continued fight against demonic animals, but at one moment they froze in place and could not understand what it was happens and why they don't stop tremble. But that's all was due to the fact that finally appeared boss. And this was, the police didn't understand the type of demon, why did the creature appear stronger the rest? But other policemen are already despairing due to the fact that they understood what everything is gone, and now they not even sure will win whether they are also magical aristocrats. But look ahead showed up immediately Minato, who started slowly go straight at him. But guys who were afraid of fear standing behind him, they started telling him not to interfere after all. He cannot defeat that monster. And turned his head. Minato answered in a relaxed manner them that he will defeat him. But those guys with incredible surprise watched Nominator and understood what they stopped trembling at that very moment immediately after his words. The girl standing behind me, I prayed that Minato defeated him. After all, they sure that his strength is equal level magical aristocrats, and perhaps he can kill an subspecies of the demon. Later a few seconds still Minato, I approached that monster. And police looking at him were ready, so that he can already show them real strength. And until our hero met eye contact with the boss, the rest of the police fought with demonic beasts. But at the same moment, boss decided attack without any talking our hero. And dodging the boss's attack, flew by straight near him. And after that rang out huge explosion right behind our hero's back. But the police noticed that this there is power first rank, and what the monster is simply terrifying. Our hero is without any fear stayed the same place. And suddenly the boss started asking him what kind of creature is he such. Minato answered, what she curvy student at the moment. But boss monster continued somehow strange look at our hero. which at one moment began to radiate huge magical power. But Boss, calling whole 6 magical circles, began to say that he would kill the strongest person. But the police all of a sudden saw what Boss uses 6th rank, and they couldn't believe it saw. After all, now though runaway though magic in the forehead in this, the allies were drawn in and they didn't know what to do. And suddenly all the monsters started turn around straight to our hero, activating their magic circles, and attack him at the same time straight with everyone's sides. The policeman saw I couldn't understand why monsters sharp coordinated, and what this is absurd. Police girl who saw it was Minato, who started screaming, so that he can hurry up or ran away, otherwise he will die. But Minato continued to stand on the same place because he was confident in his abilities. Our hero began to use 6th rank explosive flow. Yes, immediately after this, the boss started to attack him, but he still couldn't break through the barrier, our hero. Minato looked at the boss, asked him, "Really this end? This everything he is capable of?" The policeman watching the battle could not believe what this is the guy. Just like others, employees policemen, the area could not understand what now was. And the fact that this guy's power is simply beyond the realm of possibility, and seemed would impossible things happening right before your eyes. Maria 6th rank can enjoy only people of the level magical aristocracy, ranged attacks 2 technique higher class. But there is one more thing which surprised him, that Minato seems simultaneously used another magic. And usually magic can engage once then. To do this once again necessary wait a few seconds, but as he saw involved magic later moment. My powerful in itself, and the fact that he used her without delay says that he is superior aristocracy. And what intuition, the policeman didn't let him down. He's the one he's been looking for all his life. This second Minato Ichigami, how as if he had been reborn in their world. But this time Boss continued to attack our hero and attacked him bare fists. But Minato stopped him right in front of him, said, "What, there is not enough space here, and they now will replace him," and used mine 1st rank. Minato began to rise into the air, taking with him Boss. But how only the monster realized it started very loud growl, and how as soon as he rose into the air, he began to say that seems this, he can still use technology use. Boss, all of a sudden I decided to ask Minato what is his goal, and is it really interfere coordination? But he answered, what to him all equals to clumsy coordination monsters, because he's here due to the fact that now may not yield. And how only the boss began to move, he immediately pounced on no need, who began to evade into different without giving sides hit yourself. But how only he saw that the attack is coming, he still decided accept her having protected yourself with your hands, and threw it back. But immediately after this, the boss started calling magic circle, and immediately after explosion, which happened due to a boss attack. Minato didn't have time to notice how he ended up behind him, and hit him with all by force, because of which our hero began to fly straight to the ground. And watching how Minato crashed straight into the land, boss remained in the air. But suddenly he noticed something strange, because he thought, what finished that guy off with one blow? But how only arse dust Minato appeared, but that attack literally did nothing to him, only made it difficult clothes. And seeing that's what Minato remained alive, the monster began to insult him. Our hero, called the magic circle, was at his feet and began rapidly fly to him, and say that his prophecy is so bad if he understood what mafia will ineffective and chose hand-to-hand combat. But an attempt, however, it turned out to be unsuccessful. And running away, Minato started to fly straight at him, swinging with your fist. And say that blows to him, never mind how many, if only he could, I didn't apply them. And immediately after these words, Minato hit the monster with all his strength because of what he began to fly in the other direction. And how only the monster stopped, he couldn't believe that the human blow struck to him damage. And he started shouting loudly towards the cop, what he is did. To which our hero replied, boss, what did he really think? What can he do? Apply only magic after all. Now he wants him will show. Own technique, because of which that says goodbye with his worthless life. And at that very moment he began to collect huge magical power in your body and release her. Why is the monster who looked at him plunged into shock, because he did not understand what this is magic. Same with the police who were on Earth could not understand why they feel the cold and what they feel something from the sky. But how only they raised their heads. They saw Minato, which was above them. Well, our hero began to concentrate, and this it took literally a few seconds, and opened their eyes but still began to act. But Boss Apocalypse began to shout to our hero that, which what good is it to envelop myself mine and human blows ineffective against them? But before he had time to finish, Our hero was already straight near him with the words that, "Now he will check it." And how only Minato hit him with all strength, Boss understood something is wrong, and began to defend myself their huge paws. The policeman couldn't believe it anymore. Own what to my eyes Minato beats the demon hand to hand. And what they couldn't believe it, his eyes after all. Human weapons for monsters has no effect. And what can we say about damage from simple blows? But Boss, which I was kindly beaten so much I couldn't understand why human struck him damage. Our hero answered him, "What ordinary blows and weapons against monsters ineffective, but that's all things will be different if you have colossal quantity magical strength. Compound magic and combat arts attacking shrouded magical by force, and this magical combat technique which he himself created." The monster is after heard began to answer, "What man surpasses him in strength and power?" And what this not at all permissible, and immediately he began to attack with his anger straight to Minato, but dodging the monster Minato caused, made the last blowhole right in his stomach. Boss Cataclysm immediately began to fly with enormous wound in your stomach, straight to the ground. And how only he landed everyone else monsters gathered for this look. And at that moment the sky began to acquire yours normal shape and turn blue. The police noticed that finally the disaster stopped, and he boy managed to cope with the Boss Cataclysm. But they not needed yet was lose vigilance. After all, they must kill remaining monsters. Minato from the air watching what there are still monsters left, he understands that he can rely on the police. And immediately he began to go down to the police on the ground. And how as soon as he found himself on the ground, I was thinking about something that I haven't used for a long time, magical combat equipment, and he even forgot about her. But how as soon as he raised his head, he saw guys who stood opposite him. And they started thank him for his work and pacification disaster boss, and them grateful for his assistance. And raising your hands to yours head, they started saying that salute, respect Minato. The next day on the news they began to say that on this day there was an outbreak. Disasters walked around the world which reportedly were installed thanks to active activities, police and magic aristocracy. In the middle, worries about disaster reproaches to the government and police, hope for magicians and her loss, and by the excitement of the people continued dial RPM. Someone said, "What's in black will handle it." But this time Minato was at school, and the students started asking him again about what. They say that he has again stopped development disasters, and it's cool. And what kind of magic did he use this time? And it's true, boss. There was a demon. Minato simply could nothing answer after all. He got a lot of trouble with these questions. Maria, which sat on the next one desk, watched what Minato was very tired because of these interrogations. But the teacher which went into class and started saying that today's it's going to be a great hour, dedicated to recent events, disaster. And what though they all still students, but they are magicians, and perhaps someday will appear need, and there will be call to battle. So they must be ready for this. And among students, now there is a student who already has experience in fighting monsters. But at this moment the door burst in policemen and began to ask forgiveness from the teacher tomorrow Zhenya. But they couldn't understand why case and who, they such but girl answered immediately. What they have police officers' permission from the director of the academy. And I turned to Minato. The girls started saying that they want to ask him for help again. What did our hero think? That it's no longer there does not create visibility. And what about the face police, how they said before? And all the students have started closely look at our hero because of what to him, I didn't like it. And deep exhaling, he began to rise because of the chair. Going out from class, Minato asked explain situation, and the girls started talking so that he could be calm credit, and reward to him secured. In addition to the disaster, a monster appears all over the world. Mages break the rules and destroy criminal organizations, also perked up so situation. That's how it is that they are completely lacking working hands. Minato answered, what that's why they again came to him. But the girl answered what she believes. He's already tired of it. Listen their excuses, but the truth is that they don't know such strong people as him. Our hero said, what would the next time they contacted him using a smartphone? What young woman apologized who said, what they will do so? And how only she noticed that her phone vibrated. She was surprised that she had contact Minato appeared. But he began to ask what should he to come do. The policewoman answered, what they would like to ask him to deal with the monsters that have appeared in Haradazuku. And what they will take him by car and go together, but running away, our hero replied what? This will slowly, and he will go forward on your own, and quickly will get to the place. But the police standing behind him saw how fast he was surprised this. There were two people in the destroyed city at the time, boys, and one of them is the one. What the older man began to tell his brother, that all, well, he will protect him.